My name is Kelly. I married Tom when we were young and full of dreams. We were high school sweethearts, and I thought we would be happy forever. My dad, who owned a furniture factory, gave us a beautiful house as a wedding gift. 3 years later, our son Michael was born. As time went on, I focused on being the perfect housewife and mother. I kept our home clean, cooked nice meals, and made sure Michael had everything he needed. Tom worked as a sales manager, but his career wasn't going as well as he hoped. One night, he came home very frustrated and angry. He slammed his fist on the kitchen table and said, "I can't take this anymore. I'm working so hard for barely any money." I tried to stay calm and asked him what he wanted me to do. Tom's face lit up as he said, "Your dad could give me a job at his factory. You should talk to him." I was unsure because I didn't want to use our family connection, but seeing how desperate Tom was, I agreed to talk to my dad. The next day, I went to my dad's office and nervously said, "Dad, I need to ask you something. Tom isn't happy with his job. Is there a position for him at the factory?" After a moment, my dad said, "I'll give him a chance, but he'll need to prove himself like everyone else." When I told Tom the news, he was overjoyed. He picked me up and spun me around, saying, "You're amazing, Kelly. This is going to change everything for us." And for a while, it did. Tom started earning more money, and our financial worries lessened. But as one problem faded, another one appeared. My relationship with Tom's mother, Helen. Helen was very protective of Tom and didn't like me. She would drop by unannounced, criticize how I kept the house, and demand my attention. One afternoon, while I was cooking dinner, Helen burst in and said, "Kelly, I need you to take me shopping right now." I was frustrated and replied, "Helen, I'm in the middle of cooking. Can it wait until tomorrow?" She glared at me and said, "Are you saying my needs aren't important, considering everything I've done for this family?" I held back my anger, knowing it would only make things worse. "Of course not," I said. "Just give me a few minutes to finish up here." As I drove Helen to the mall, she complained about my driving, my cooking, and pretty much everything else. I couldn't help but wonder how my life had turned out this way. I was capable and smart, but here I was trying to please everyone else while my own dreams were forgotten. One frustrating afternoon, Helen came into our house unannounced, as usual. "Kelly," she called, her voice grating on my nerves. "I'm hungry. Make me something to eat." I bit my tongue and left the laundry to go to the kitchen. As I cooked, Helen sat at the table, criticizing everything I did. "You're using too much oil," she said, "and cut those vegetables smaller. Can't you cook properly?" When I finally set the meal in front of her, I hoped she would eat quickly and leave. But to my surprise, she packed up all the food and said, "I'll be taking this with me. I have bridge club tonight, and this will be good for snacks." I stared at her shocked. "Helen, that was supposed to be our dinner." She shrugged and said, "You can always make more. It's not like you have anything better to do." After she left, I sat down, feeling defeated. I glanced at the clock and realized I had less than an hour to make another meal before Tom came home. When Tom arrived, he found me frantically cooking. "What's going on?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Why isn't dinner ready?" I told him what had happened with his mother, hoping he'd understand. Instead, Tom's face darkened. "Mom was here, and you didn't make her feel welcome," he said angrily. "Kelly, you know how important family is to me. You should have been more accommodating." "Accommodating?" I repeated, stunned. "Tom, she took our dinner and treats me like a servant." Tom shook his head, annoyed. "You're exaggerating. Mom just wants to feel loved and appreciated. Is that too much to ask?" As we ate the rushed meal in silence, I felt a growing distance between us. Tom, who used to be my high school sweetheart and closest friend, now felt like a stranger. One evening, Tom came home from work in a bad mood. His face was red with anger as he slammed the front door. "Kelly," Tom yelled, "your father is a tyrant. He humiliates people and uses them like pawns in his little game." I was shocked. My father had always been fair and kind. What happened? I asked carefully. Tom's eyes were blazing with anger. "I stood up for an employee today because your father was treating him unfairly. And you know what your precious daddy did? He fired me on the spot." This didn't sound like my father at all. "There must be a mistake," I said. "Let me talk to Dad and hear his side of the story." "No," Tom shouted, making me flinch. "You will not talk to your father or your mother. They no longer exist for us. Do you understand?" Trembling, I nodded, too shocked and scared to argue. In the days that followed, Tom found another job and started earning well again. But the incident had changed something deep in our relationship. The warmth and love I once felt for him were replaced by fear and resentment. As the years went by and our son Michael grew up, he often asked about his grandparents, but Tom would shut down any conversation about them. "You have one grandmother," he would say firmly. "My mother. That's all you need to know." As Michael prepared to leave for college in another city, I felt a mix of pride and sadness. My baby was growing up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing the only ally I had in the house. Over the next few years, my life fell into a dull routine. I catered to Tom's every wish and endured Helen's constant criticism. Without Michael around, their treatment of me became even harsher. One afternoon, as I was scrubbing the kitchen floor with Helen watching me closely, the phone rang. I reached for it, but Helen grabbed it and said, "I'll answer it. You focus on cleaning that floor. I can still see spots." I gritted my teeth and went back to cleaning. But I couldn't help but overhear Helen's part of the conversation. "Yes, this is the residence of Kelly." "Who, her father?" "I'm sorry, but Kelly isn't available. Please don't call again." My head snapped up. "Wait," I called out, but Helen had already hung up. "That was your father," she said coldly. "I told him not to call you again. You should thank me for protecting this family from those toxic people." I felt a rush of anger and frustration. "You had no right to do that," I said, my voice shaking. "He's my father. I should have been allowed to speak to him." Helen's eyes narrowed. "You ungrateful little." Just then, Tom walked in. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Helen immediately put on a hurt expression. "Oh, Tom, your wife is being so disrespectful to me after all I do for this family." Tom turned to me, his face dark with anger. "Is this true, Kelly? Are you disrespecting my mother?" I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came out. I realized with a sinking feeling that it didn't matter what I said, Tom would always side with Helen. A year had passed since that phone call from my father. Life continued in its stifling routine, with Tom and Helen's control over me growing tighter every day. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, everything changed. The phone rang while I was preparing breakfast. Tom was in the shower, and Helen hadn't yet arrived for her daily inspection of my housekeeping. For once, I could answer without interference. "Hello?" I said tentatively. "Kelly, is that you?" The voice on the other end was familiar but distant. It was my father's voice. "Kelly, it's your mother. She's very ill. The doctors don't think she has much time left. She needs you. We both do." Just then, I heard the bathroom door open. Tom would be down any minute. "I'll try, Dad. I promise I'll try," I whispered before quickly hanging up. When Tom entered the kitchen, I struggled to keep myself composed. "Who was that on the phone?" he asked suspiciously. I took a deep breath. It was my father. "My mother is very ill. She's dying. I need to go see her." Tom's face hardened. "Absolutely not. We've been through this, Kelly. Your parents don't exist for us anymore." I felt something snap inside me. For the first time in years, I stood up to him. "I'm going with or without your permission. She's my mother, and I won't let her die without saying goodbye." Tom's jaw clenched. "Fine. One day. That's all you get. And then you come back home where you belong." I nodded, unable to speak. One day was better than nothing. With trembling hands, I called my son Michael to tell him what was happening. To my surprise and relief, he immediately offered to come with me. The next morning, Michael and I set off for my childhood home. When we arrived, my father met us at the door. He looked older than I remembered, with deep lines etched into his face from grief. Without saying a word, he pulled me into a tight embrace. He led us to my mother's room. She lay in bed, pale and frail, but her eyes brightened when she saw me. "Kelly," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. "My baby girl." I rushed to her side and took her hand in mine. "Mom, I'm here. I'm so sorry. Can you ever forgive me?" She smiled weakly. "There's nothing to forgive, sweetheart. I'm just glad you're here now." We spent the day by her bedside, sharing memories and catching up. As the sun began to set, my mother's breathing grew labored. She squeezed my hand and looked into my eyes. "Kelly," she said softly, "promise me you'll really live your life. Don't let anyone cage your spirit again." Tears streamed down my face as I nodded. "I promise, Mom. I promise." She smiled one last time, then closed her eyes. Her hand went limp in mine. She was gone. Suddenly, my phone started ringing incessantly. I knew without looking that it was Tom. I answered the call and moved to the hallway for privacy. Tom's voice was sharp with anger. "Where the hell are you, Kelly? You were supposed to be back hours ago." "Tom, I can't leave yet," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "My mother just passed away. I need to stay for the funeral." "Absolutely not," he roared. "I told you one day, and that's all you get. If you're not back by tomorrow, don't bother coming back at all." His words felt like a threat and a promise all at once. For a moment, I was tempted to rush back to the life I knew, but then I remembered my mother's last words urging me to live fully. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm staying." I ended the call before he could respond. My heart pounded. For the first time in our marriage, I had defied Tom, and it was both terrifying and liberating. The next few days were a blur of grief and preparations. On the day of the funeral, as we stood around my mother's grave, my phone rang again. Tom's number flashed on the screen. Without thinking, I hit the speaker button to silence it quickly. Tom's voice burst forth, loud and angry. "Kelly, this is your last chance. If you don't come home right now, I swear I'll come and drag you back myself. You ungrateful filth. After everything I've done for you." Tom's voice screamed through the phone before I quickly ended the call, my face burning with shame and anger. The people around us looked shocked, and Michael's face was a mask of fury. My father looked more concerned than anything else. He pulled me aside as soon as the service ended. "Kelly," he said gently, "we need to talk." We walked to a quiet corner of the cemetery, and my father took a deep breath. "Sweetheart, there's something you need to know about Tom. Something I should have told you years ago." I listened in stunned silence as my father revealed the truth about why Tom had really left the company. It wasn't because he had stood up for an employee. It was because my father had caught him stealing money from the company and manipulating prices to pocket the difference. "I fired him to protect the company and our clients," my father explained. "I didn't tell you because I thought you loved him and I didn't want to come between you. But now, seeing how he speaks to you and what your life has become, I can't stay silent anymore." I felt as if the ground had opened up beneath me. All these years I had believed Tom's lies, allowed him to cut me off from my family, and endured his and Helen's emotional abuse, all based on falsehoods. "There's more," my father continued, his voice grave. "I recently heard from a friend that Tom's company is under investigation. There are discrepancies. Kelly, I think he might be up to his old tricks again." As the full impact of his words hit me, I felt a strange mix of despair and liberation. The life I had known was falling apart, but from its ashes, I saw a chance for a new beginning. The day after the funeral, my father, Michael, and I returned to my house. To our surprise, the place was bustling with activity. Helen's friends were milling about, and the smell of food wafted from the open windows. We walked in to find a full-blown party in progress. Helen, holding a glass of wine, spotted us first. Her eyes narrowed as she took in my father and Michael. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're late, Kelly. My birthday celebration started an hour ago," Helen snapped. I was momentarily stunned. With everything that had happened recently, I had completely forgotten about Helen's birthday. Before I could respond, she thrust a dirty rag into my hands. "Don't just stand there," she ordered. "Start cleaning up these tables. They won't wipe themselves." My father, who had been silently observing, suddenly erupted. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way?" he thundered, making the room fall silent. "She's not a servant. She's a grown woman who deserves respect." Helen laughed derisively. "Respect? She gave up any right to respect when she married my son. Her family is Tom and me. You're nothing to her anymore." I watched in disbelief as my father and Helen argued, their voices rising. The party guests looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to leave or stay. Suddenly, Tom burst into the room. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his eyes locking onto me. "Kelly, why aren't you serving the guests? And what are they doing here?" He gestured angrily toward my father and Michael. Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and anger poured out. "No, Tom," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'm not serving anyone. I'm not cleaning up, and I'm not staying silent anymore." The room fell deathly quiet. Even Helen seemed at a loss for words. "I know the truth, Tom. I continued, pulling out the divorce papers I had hastily prepared. I know why you really left my father's company. I'm done. I want a divorce. For a moment, Tom looked like he might lunge at me, but then, perhaps realizing he was outnumbered, he deflated. Fine, he snarled. Take your divorce. But don't think you'll get a penny from me. I couldn't help but laugh. This house is mine, Tom. My father gave it to us as a wedding gift. Remember, you're the one who needs to leave. Tom and Helen left shortly after, casting venomous glares our way as they went. When the door closed behind them, I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. Michael, who had been quietly watching everything unfold, finally spoke up. Mom, why didn't you tell me things were so bad? I'm sorry, Michael, I said. I thought I was protecting you, but I realize now I was only teaching you the wrong lessons about love and respect. In the weeks that followed, my life changed dramatically. The divorce proceedings began, and I focused on rebuilding my life. My father, true to his word, stood by me every step of the way. One afternoon, as we sat in his study discussing the future, he brought up a topic I hadn't expected. Kelly, he began, his voice gentle but serious. I've been thinking. I'm not getting any younger, and the factory needs new blood. How would you feel about coming to work with me? I blinked in surprise. Me? But Dad, I don't know anything about running a business. He chuckled. Neither did I when I started. You're smart, Kelly. You can learn. Besides, it's about time you had a chance to spread your wings. Over the next few months, I immersed myself in learning the business. My father was a patient teacher, guiding me through the details of running a furniture factory. I discovered a passion for design and innovation that I never knew I had. Meanwhile, the divorce dragged on. True to form, Tom fought me every step of the way. He contested the ownership of the house and even tried to turn Michael against me. In the end, justice prevailed. I was awarded the house and substantial financial compensation for the years of emotional abuse. Tom, facing charges for his fraudulent activities, found himself deep in debt and unable to hold senior positions. As for Helen, she faded into the background, her influence over my life finally broken. The last I heard, she had moved in with a distant relative. Her social circle diminished after the truth about Tom came out. 3 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. One Sunday morning, my father called me into his office. His face was solemn as he gestured for me to sit. Kelly, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I'm not well. The doctors don't think I have much time left. The world seemed to spin around me. Dad, no, I whispered, reaching for his hand. He squeezed my fingers gently. It's okay, sweetheart, he said softly. I've had a good life. Now I can go knowing that you're strong, that you're free, and that you'll be okay. Tears streamed down my face as he continued. I'm leaving everything to you, Kelly. The business, the house, everything. You've more than proven yourself. I know you'll take good care of it all. In the weeks that followed, we spent as much time together as possible. My father's condition worsened rapidly, but his spirit remained strong. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy that I was now responsible for. News of my father's passing and my inheritance spread quickly through our small town. I was still adjusting to my new reality when an unexpected visitor arrived at my doorstep. On a crisp autumn afternoon, I heard the doorbell ring. Opening the door, I was shocked to see Tom standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers and looking apologetic. Kelly, he said, his voice softer than I had heard it in years. I'm so sorry about your father. May I come in? Reluctantly, I stepped aside to let him enter. We stood in the foyer, an awkward silence hanging between us. Finally, Tom spoke up. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Kelly, about us, about our life together. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I've changed. My mother passed away last month. She was always the one who came between us. Now there's nothing stopping us from being happy together again. As I opened my mouth to respond, I heard a car pulling up in the driveway. A moment later, the front door opened, and a tall, distinguished-looking man walked in. Kelly, darling, I'm home, he called out, then stopped short when he saw Tom. Tom looked between us, confusion and anger dawning on his face. Who the hell is this? Tom demanded. The man stepped forward, extending his hand to Tom. I'm David, Kelly's husband. And you are? Tom ignored the outstretched hand, his face contorting with rage. Husband? What the hell, Kelly? You were married? You traitor. David's expression hardened. He stepped between Tom and me, his voice low and dangerous. "I suggest you leave now and never speak to my wife that way again," David said firmly. Tom lunged forward, but David was quicker. He grabbed Tom by the arm and guided him to the door. "This is your only warning," David said calmly. "Stay away from Kelly. If you ever come near her or insult her again, you'll regret it." With that, David shut the door, and Tom's angry face disappeared as the sound of screeching tires faded away. David turned to me, his face softening with concern. "Are you okay, love?" I nodded, stepping into his embrace. "I'm fine. I'm just glad you're home." Looking up at him with a smile, I added, "And I'm glad you waited for me after all these years." David chuckled and pressed a kiss to my forehead. "I've loved you since high school, Kelly. I would have waited forever if I had to." As we stood there in each other's arms, I marveled at how life had come full circle. David and I had been high school sweethearts before Tom came into the picture. After my divorce, we had reconnected, and our old feelings had blossomed anew. We had married in a quiet ceremony 6 months ago, starting a new chapter in both our lives. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Michael. "Mom, great news. Jessica's pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother." In the months that followed, life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Michael and his wife Jessica moved back to our city, eager to be close to family as they prepared for their baby's arrival. They joined us at the factory, bringing fresh ideas and energy to the business.
"Please leave. It's too crowded in here," Jennifer said with a laugh. Her smile was smug and unsettling, the worst I had ever seen. I stood there, shocked, as Jennifer repeated herself. I didn't understand why I had to leave my own house. "This is my house, you know. What are you talking about?" I asked. "I know this house is in Daniel's name," she replied. I was shocked by Jennifer's nerve. Even though I had explained everything when we got married, it seemed she hadn't listened at all. "Fine, I'll leave," I said with a sigh. Watching Jennifer gleefully unpack her furniture into Daniel's home, I wished he were here, but he was away on a business trip for a month. I decided to wait until he returned to discuss the situation. "Well then, take care," I said. With that, I left the house filled with memories. I knew where I was going next. I anticipated Daniel's reaction when he returned. "My name is Karen, and I'm a 65-year-old housewife. I worked until I was 60 and now live comfortably thanks to my pension and the inheritance from my husband, who passed away 5 years ago. He came from a wealthy family and owned several properties. Despite his wealth, he enjoyed working and was frugal. During the years we raised our child, there were times I got frustrated with my husband for being so focused on work, but I always admired him for taking on challenges with a smile. It's been 5 years since he passed away in October, in a tragic accident that happened on our wedding anniversary. I can't forget seeing the crushed cake box at the accident scene. He left behind a significant inheritance, insurance money, and our beloved son Daniel. Daniel turned 40 this year and works at a big company. After his father's sudden death, Daniel went through a rough patch. He was cheated on and divorced by his then-wife, and he briefly sought counseling to cope. I worried he might quit his job, but then he met Jennifer, and things turned around quickly once they started dating. They got married last year, and since then he's been even more driven at work and seems to have fully recovered. Jennifer, my son's wife, is a single mother with 2 boys aged 2 and 5. Daniel, who adores kids, had grown close to them, and I found them incredibly cute. Daniel couldn't have children due to an illness in his childhood, so the idea of having grandchildren filled me with joy. I thought Jennifer was quite generous, although she occasionally said things that surprised me. Overall, I believe she had a good heart. Daniel and everyone else seemed to agree. It never occurred to me that things could turn out the way they did. After their marriage, Daniel and Jennifer moved into a property near our house. I had suggested they live in one of my husband's houses. "We want to start in a home we've chosen ourselves," Daniel insisted. He explained that Jennifer had a preference for cute things, and none of the available properties matched her tastes. When I first heard this, I was puzzled, but since they were newly married with children, I decided not to dwell on it, thinking they deserved to enjoy their preferred lifestyle. Daniel was often busy with work and traveled frequently. During his absences, Jennifer would bring the kids over for dinner. The grandchildren were well behaved, but Jennifer's behavior was quite different. She helped herself to food and often went through our closets without asking, even entering our bedroom to take my jewelry. This shocked me, and I felt the need to confront her about it. Jennifer suddenly burst into tears. "I just wanted us to get along. Please don't hate me." Faced with Jennifer's tears, I found myself comforting her instead of addressing the issue. I chose not to tell Daniel about what happened, and since Jennifer didn't take anything else after that, I decided to keep the incident to myself. About 6 months into their marriage, Jennifer started sending her kids over to stay with us frequently. She would call abruptly the day before and hang up quickly, making it hard to say no. Reluctantly, I found myself taking care of the kids each time. Although they remained obedient, their table manners had noticeably deteriorated since we first met. They ate loudly and often spilled food outside their plates, despite being well-behaved before. I had to remind them repeatedly, but they would only listen temporarily before slipping back into their old habits during the next visit. This routine left me feeling frustrated. Jennifer appeared unconcerned and would drop off her children at our home and leave quickly. Initially, Jennifer would visit with the kids, but after a few times, she started sending them over alone. "Jennifer, it's okay for the kids to come over, but I'd appreciate it if you could join them sometimes," I suggested. "But I'm quite busy," Jennifer replied evasively. That night, Daniel called me unexpectedly. "Hey Mom, could you try to be a bit more understanding with Jennifer?" "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. I thought I had been quite kind to her, but Daniel seemed to have a different perspective. "Jennifer feels pressured to visit often because she's afraid of being expected to help out like she had to in her previous marriage. She had a tough time with her ex-husband's family, so please go easy on her." "Really? Okay, I understand." It seemed Jennifer had misunderstood my intentions. I responded to Daniel with mixed feelings, and the next day, Jennifer sent the kids over to our house again. As their first year of marriage passed, the children began spending half of each week with us. Meanwhile, Jennifer would only visit a few times a month, staying for about 10 minutes each time. I started feeling uneasy about Jennifer, who always seemed too busy to talk. When I asked the children about Jennifer's plans, they would look guilty and shake their heads. Initially, I tried asking a few times, but their reactions made me feel so guilty that I couldn't bring myself to pry further. Then one day, Jennifer unexpectedly came over with Daniel. We sat down for coffee and had a pleasant chat after a long while. That's when Daniel spoke up. "I have something to discuss," he said seriously. "The kids have really bonded with you, and I'm away on business trips often, so I can't spend much time with them. If you're okay with it, I'd like you to move in and help Jennifer out. What do you think?" "Move in? Well, what about Jennifer?" I was taken aback by the sudden suggestion of living together, nearly dropping my coffee cup in surprise. However, I kept my composure and turned to Jennifer. "Karen has always been a tremendous help, and I'd really appreciate her assistance," Jennifer chimed in. "Is that so? Well, I'll need some time to think about it," I replied. Daniel seemed pleased with my response. Knowing him, he must be concerned about my well-being too. I pondered over the proposal for a couple of days and eventually decided to accept. From there, we began clearing out unnecessary items and preparing rooms for Daniel's family and the children. With the kids' help, we finished cleaning up sooner than expected, although the effort left me with daily muscle pain. A stark reminder of my age. Despite the challenges, I successfully cleared out 2 rooms. As I busily cleaned, Jennifer didn't offer to help at all, which made me increasingly uneasy about living with her. Then came moving day. As the movers brought in boxes, Jennifer pulled me aside into the garden. With a puzzled expression, I turned to her, only to be met with a malicious smile. Then, unbelievably, she said something that left me stunned. "Please leave. It's too cramped in here," Jennifer laughed, her smile both smug and unsettling. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why was she asking me to leave when it was my house? I was bewildered. "This is my house, you know. What are you talking about?" I asked. "I know this house is in Daniel's name," she replied sharply. Jennifer's assertion left me feeling inwardly frustrated. Despite explaining everything when we got married, it seemed she hadn't paid attention at all. "All right then, I'll leave," I said with a sigh. I watched as furniture that reflected Jennifer's tastes was moved in, and she seemed overjoyed. It would have been better if Daniel had been there, but he was away on a business trip. He wouldn't be back for a month, so I decided to postpone any discussion until then. "Well then, take care," I said as I left the house filled with memories. I already knew where I was headed next. I eagerly anticipated Daniel's reaction upon his return. Without delay, I moved my belongings into my new home. The new home was a villa my husband and I had visited once, filled with memories, including where he proposed to me. While it didn't hold as many memories as our previous home, it held a special place in my heart, as we had planned to spend our second life here together. After finishing unpacking, I relaxed alone on the sofa. The place was very comfortable, thanks to the caretaker's diligent maintenance. I felt a pang of sadness for not seeing the children anymore, but I was prepared to sever ties depending on Daniel's response. A month passed quickly, and around the time Daniel's business trip ended, he called me. I picked up the phone, feeling a bit nervous. "Mom, where are you? There's no space for you here, and we were supposed to be living together. What's going on? Hasn't Jennifer said anything to you?" When I got back, Mom wasn't here, and Jennifer just cries without giving me any answers. Well then, come to this address I'm about to give you, I replied. I gave Daniel the address and hung up. The next day, Daniel arrived at my new home with Jennifer and the children. When I opened the door, I saw Daniel looking a bit somber and Jennifer appearing pale. "Welcome. Is something wrong?" I asked, concerned. No, nothing," Jennifer replied, visibly tense, while the children looked around with curiosity, especially the 5-year-old who seemed particularly fascinated. I guided Daniel's family into the living room. As they took in the fully furnished space, Daniel seemed to realize that I had no intention of continuing our previous living arrangement. "Hey Mom, why did you suddenly decide not to live together?" Daniel asked, puzzled. "Well, Jennifer should have a good understanding of that, shouldn't she?" I replied. Daniel scratched his head with a slightly irritated expression before recounting what he had heard from Jennifer. "Jennifer mentioned that you didn't like her choice of furniture, right? But that was just for our room. Couldn't you have let it go? She also said she had to buy more furniture for the living room because you moved out." "Oh, so she added more furniture, did she?" I looked directly at Jennifer, who twitched nervously. Her lips curved slightly upwards, as if she believed Daniel wouldn't believe my side of the story without proof. "Jennifer, why lie?" I asked plainly. "I haven't lied about anything," Jennifer replied, tears welling up in her eyes. Daniel immediately stepped in to console her, seeming to view me as the source of the conflict. Meanwhile, the grandchildren hung their heads behind them, avoiding eye contact with Jennifer. I let out a frustrated sigh. "Jennifer, stop the fake crying. The children can see right through it." "That's awful, Daniel. I'm really not lying. Please believe me," Jennifer pleaded, clinging to Daniel and burying her face against him. Despite her words, her voice lacked genuine emotion. I felt annoyed with Daniel for siding with Jennifer in this situation. "Mom, Jennifer may have made mistakes, but leaving without discussing it isn't right. Can't we try to work things out?" Daniel pleaded. "Well, I do owe you an apology for leaving abruptly, but any reconciliation with Jennifer will have to wait until you hear this," I replied, tapping my mobile phone. Immediately, a voice played out loud, causing Jennifer's face to turn pale. "You recorded it?" I accidentally hit the video button while trying to capture the kids playing. The recording continued without my realizing. The voice from my phone sounded unlike Jennifer's usual tone, and Daniel looked bewildered, shifting his gaze between my phone and Jennifer. "Jennifer was the one who asked me to leave. I was just following her instructions," I clarified. "Is this really you, Jennifer?" "It can't be," Daniel demanded, pushing away from Jennifer, who clung to him, and asked her directly. However, Jennifer remained silent, staring at the ground. Daniel's frustration grew as he raised his voice, demanding answers from Jennifer. "It's not true. Are you taking Karen's side?" Jennifer managed to protest weakly, but the recorded voice clearly called out the children's names, leaving no room for doubt. Despite Daniel's persistence and Jennifer's attempts to dodge the truth, the situation became wearisome. Finally, Jennifer slipped up in exasperation. "I never wanted to live with someone else in the first place." "What? You were the one who wanted Mom to live with us," Daniel said, clearly shocked by this revelation. Jennifer defiantly explained her reasoning. "Exactly. I couldn't understand why Karen was living in a house under your name while we had to rent. I wanted a home of our own." It appeared Jennifer was worried about being judged for living in a rental property after marrying again. Daniel had leased a luxurious condominium in the area, which cost around $4,000 per month. Despite this, Jennifer seemed to look down on it simply because it was a rental. This attitude caused me a different kind of frustration. Jennifer glared defiantly at me. "And now Karen is harassing me. This is the house I've always dreamed of. Why are you living here?" Daniel looked perplexed by Jennifer's accusation. Unlike Daniel, I straightforwardly explained to Jennifer, who was clearly on edge. "Why?" "Because this property originally belonged to my husband." "That's a lie because this place is," Jennifer started, possibly thinking of the caretaker or something else she was mistaken about. I showed Jennifer a photo on my mobile phone. Upon seeing the person in the photo, Jennifer exclaimed, "Father?" My husband had passed away before Daniel remarried, so Jennifer had never met him. She had never referred to my husband as father. Therefore, the father Jennifer mentioned must be the children's paternal grandfather. The photo captured Jennifer's father-in-law and me shaking hands. It was taken as a memento when we moved in. Jennifer looked at me, her face turning pale. "How do you know him?" "How? Because he's the caretaker here, of course," I replied calmly. Upon hearing this revelation, Jennifer sat down right where she stood. Daniel also appeared stunned, struggling to grasp the situation. Sensing an opportunity to clarify things further, I decided to continue. "We had a conversation when we moved in. That's when I learned he's your ex-husband's father, and also the real reason behind your divorce." "The real reason for the divorce?" Daniel's voice echoed in surprise. Jennifer, no longer trying to pretend, became visibly flustered by my words. Karen, there must be some misunderstanding. I'm sorry, let's go home together. Mom, please tell me, Daniel interrupted Jennifer, his expression earnest as he looked at me for answers. It would have been less damaging for Jennifer if this had come to light later, but I had no intention of showing mercy. I instructed the grandchildren to go play in the garden. They glanced at Jennifer but obeyed my request and headed outside. Once the children were fully engaged in their play, I turned back to Jennifer. I heard from Jennifer that her divorce was due to her husband's infidelity, but in reality, it was Jennifer who had an affair. Daniel was visibly shocked, and Jennifer trembled, avoiding my gaze. I can't believe this. Karen, why would you lie about this? Daniel asked, clearly shaken by the revelations. Oh, I also have a copy of the notarized document here. I retrieved the document from a drawer and handed it to Daniel. Daniel's face went pale as he scanned through the document. What's all this? Compensation? Custody to be revisited once the child can choose? Meeting before remarrying? I was never told about any of this. That's right. The other family also claimed they weren't informed about the remarriage, I added. Jennifer stared down, her face drained of color. Daniel sighed heavily and turned to Jennifer, his expression now devoid of his earlier kindness. Remember when I got divorced because I was cheated on? What did you say then? That the one who cheats is entirely at fault, right? Unforgivable, right? Yeah, Jennifer muttered quietly. Daniel's voice grew heated in response to Jennifer's silence. So the story about divorcing to escape from your husband's infidelity and extreme control, putting the kids at risk, was also a lie. What's that about? Jennifer appeared unsure how to answer. Daniel's frustration intensified. And didn't you say, I would never cheat? Daniel pressed on, his voice sharp with anger. I had to say that or you wouldn't have dated me, Jennifer finally replied, her voice tinged with desperation. Right, of course, Daniel retorted sharply, not letting Jennifer finish. Daniel was visibly agitated, his breathing heavy with emotion. Jennifer, on the other hand, began to sulk defiantly. I've heard you've been declining visits since you started dating Daniel and apparently leaving all the housework and childcare to his family. And now you're trying to blame me after remarrying. Why are you making unnecessary accusations? Jennifer shouted at me, her voice loud and defensive. Daniel gave Jennifer a cold, distant look. Her unguarded outburst had shattered the image she had maintained. It's over between us. Let's get a divorce, Daniel stated firmly. No, I don't want a divorce, Jennifer pleaded, clinging to Daniel, who tried to shake her off impatiently. Despite his attempts, Jennifer persisted. Just as Daniel's frustration seemed ready to boil over, an unexpected voice intervened. Mom, you're saying the same things you told Dad. You've got a new boyfriend now, so stop bothering Daniel. Michael, Jennifer's eldest son, spoke with a surprising maturity for his young age. His sudden return from the garden surprised not just me, but everyone present. What? Why are you saying unnecessary things, Michael? Jennifer snapped, clearly caught off guard by her son's unexpected words. What do you mean by a new boyfriend? Daniel asked, squatting down to look at Michael, clearly perplexed. Michael spoke again, maintaining his composure. Whenever you're away, Mom tells me to go to Grandma's house, and then her boyfriend comes to pick me up. Michael, don't lie, Jennifer interjected quickly. Daniel hugged Michael tightly and turned a stern gaze towards Jennifer, who looked taken aback by his genuine anger. We'll talk about this later, including the boyfriend and the compensation, with him present. It's not like that. I love you. It was just a brief fling with that guy, Jennifer pleaded desperately. That guy, huh? Daniel remarked coldly, his disappointment evident. Jennifer looked crestfallen at Daniel's remark. With a resolute expression, Daniel stood up, shielding Michael, and stared coldly at Jennifer. Without hesitation, he forcefully escorted her out of the house. Wait, Daniel. Open the door. The next time we talk will be with a lawyer present. I'll arrange for the kids to see their father. I've already called my parents. They're on their way to pick them up. What do my parents have to do with this? Jennifer continued knocking on the door for a while, but soon the noise ceased. Shortly after, I heard voices arguing and then the doorbell rang. Jennifer's parents stood there, looking apologetic. After entrusting the grandchildren to me, they took Jennifer back with them. Later, the grandchildren were safely introduced to Jennifer's ex-husband's family. It turned out that Jennifer had changed her phone number and moved without informing anyone since she started dating Daniel, making it impossible to reach her. Her ex-husband and his parents were overcome with emotion and embraced the children as soon as they saw them. Although Daniel had already legally adopted the children, transferring custody back to Jennifer's ex-husband took some time due to the legal process. It seems Jennifer's life has taken a sharp turn after the consequences of her actions. Her strict reprimand from her parents and her current work situation at a family-run hotel indicate a stark change in her circumstances. With high alimony payments to both Daniel and her ex-husband, she reportedly has little respite from her duties. "I can't stand it anymore. I want to quit," she frequently complains, but her relatives are keeping a tight rein on her. Meanwhile, Daniel, having experienced his second divorce, has sworn off marriage and thrown himself into his work. Despite the lingering shock, I recently learned he's reconnected with a childhood friend who lives nearby and is 10 years his junior. They'd occasionally go out for meals together, and this friend even visited me recently to say hello. It turns out she's harbored feelings for Daniel since they were kids and never pursued other relationships because of her enduring affection for him. As a parent, it warms my heart to see that the young girl who once dreamed of marrying Daniel still holds those feelings into adulthood. Daniel himself seems somewhat pleased by this newfound connection. "Living in a house where I was proposed to holds immense significance for me. Despite the alterations Jennifer made, the house has been completely renovated and now serves as a rental property. Living here alone, I never feel lonely. It's as if my husband's presence is still nearby. I cherish each day, anticipating the second phase of my life where I'll gather stories to share with him when we're reunited." "Oh, Mom, when I came back from shopping, I saw my daughter Madison crouched at the entrance with a big belly. She looked really tired and her face was thin and pale. Her eyes were a bit unfocused as she looked up at me. Next to her, a little child was holding on tightly to Madison, calling Mom, Mom. I realized this child was my granddaughter, Harper. I brought them both inside and asked what happened. Madison told me that her husband, Stephen, got frustrated because she couldn't move around much during her second pregnancy and had left them in front of the house. Madison was clearly in her last month of pregnancy and needed care. Even though the days were sunny and warm, the wind was cold. I felt so angry, wondering what Stephen would have done if I hadn't been there. I didn't think he was the kind of person to do something like this. Pregnancy isn't an illness, right? We have pregnant women at my work who do their jobs from home just fine. And Harper, she's always crying and so loud. My colleagues' kids never cry like that." When I finally called Stephen, he sighed loudly on purpose. "An unemployed, obese woman and a noisy child are a nuisance. Let her parents take care of them for a while." Realizing it was pointless to talk to him, I decided to focus on caring for Madison and Harper instead. Half a year later, on a spring afternoon, Stephen called. "Hey, what's going on? Your house is gone." At first, I was confused, but then I understood. "You finally noticed," I replied. After hearing the truth, he was speechless and turned pale. "My name is Scarlett. I'm a 58-year-old housewife. My husband passed away about 3 years ago, leaving me alone, but I don't mind being alone. His study is filled with books, including his favorite novels, challenging research papers, magazine clippings, and diaries. Being in the study makes me feel close to him. Sometimes I spend time there, looking through the books. My daughter Madison, her daughter Harper, and Madison's husband Stephen live about a 30-minute drive away in the next town. Stephen works at a big company owned by his dad. At just 33, he's already a department head and is even considered a potential future CEO. Madison and Stephen met at a beer party when Madison was out with friends. One of her friends recognized an old classmate, who turned out to be Stephen. They discovered they worked near each other and started seeing each other more often, either by bumping into one another or going out for drinks with friends. Eventually, this led to a relationship. Madison wasn't the type to make the first move and often called me, unsure of what to do. I wasn't very experienced in love either, so I tell her, "Well, I'm not sure either, but maybe just go out for a meal and enjoy yourselves." Unlike me, my husband had experienced many romances before we met. But when it came to our daughter's love life, we both agreed on one thing: she shouldn't date someone strange. My husband, always protective, even joked about calling himself strange. Their relationship continued smoothly, and within a year, they happily announced their engagement. Stephen, with his strong position in his father's company and his impressive sales skills, had earned my husband's trust enough for us to feel comfortable in trusting our daughter to him. Reflecting on this, my husband reassured me, saying, "I also felt at ease sending our daughter off to such a respectable person." Shortly after, Madison and Stephen married and moved to the next town to begin their life together. Initially, Madison would visit us often, sharing the excitement of her pregnancy and her worries about childbirth. About 3 or 4 months after Madison shared her pregnancy news, my husband tragically passed away. He was involved in a car accident caused by a truck driver who had fallen asleep at the wheel. Both Madison and I were deeply shaken by the sudden loss. We struggled to maintain our composure as we rushed to arrange the funeral and handle the necessary company and government procedures. The days passed quickly, and before we knew it, a month had already gone by. It's strange that I hadn't seen Stephen much since he first came to introduce himself before the wedding. Even at the funeral, he only stayed for about an hour before leaving abruptly. I found it a bit rude, but Madison explained, "That's just how he is. "Stephen is always busy with work," she said with a forced smile tinged with sadness. It seemed like she didn't get much chance to talk or spend time with Stephen, who often left early for golf meetings on weekends. Being the son of a company president might excuse his absence somewhat, but I wished he would consider Madison, especially since she was heavily pregnant. As summer drew to a close, Madison returned to our home to give birth. With her belly fully rounded, she was eagerly anticipating meeting her baby. "It's a girl. We've already picked a name," she told me. "Oh, really? What's her name?" I asked. "Harper. Stephen and I chose it," Madison replied, smiling warmly. She gave birth within 2 weeks and soon returned home where Stephen was waiting. "Madison, make sure to visit us sometimes. Bring Harper too," I urged her. I called Madison again, hoping to reconnect, but her response sounded hesitant. "Yeah, maybe once things settle down I'll come over," she replied. Despite my concerns, I hoped it was just a temporary situation. Madison was always busy with childcare and housework, and Stephen, who should have been dependable, often came home late or not until the morning. I wondered aloud, even if he's the president's son, can his job really be that demanding? Despite several attempts to reach out, the pattern remained unchanged. It had been 3 years since Harper was born, yet I had only seen my granddaughter once, right after Madison gave birth. I wanted to support Madison and had expressed this to her many times over the phone, but her responses were always evasive. Before a long weekend, I decided to call Madison again. "Hello, Madison. How have you been? I was thinking of visiting you and Harper soon." I knew I had to be careful not to push too hard. Conversations with friends in the neighborhood had taught me that it's becoming less common for grandparents to see their grandchildren regularly, and pushing too much could strain the relationship further. Madison was my daughter, but I feared this call might lead to rejection, forcing me to accept the situation. With these thoughts, I waited anxiously for Madison's response. "Mom, I haven't been feeling well lately and I need some space. Please don't call me for a while," Madison said over the phone. "Are you okay? If you're not feeling well, I'm really worried. Can I bring over some food?" I asked, concerned. "I don't need it. Can we stop this? I'm going to hang up," Madison replied, sounding frustrated. "Wait, how about Harper and Stephen? Is he doing well? Has he caught a cold?" I pressed, trying to keep the conversation going. "You're being too nosy, Mom. I want to raise my child on my own, so please stop calling," Madison snapped before hanging up abruptly. Feeling hurt and confused, I paused, unsure of what to do next. The brief call left me deeply shaken. I never expected Madison to feel that way about me. I thought I was showing kindness, but now I realized I had been meddling, and it pained me as I stared at the silent phone. Perhaps she was exhausted and stressed from childcare, or maybe I had crossed a line by interfering too much. Considering different possibilities, I acknowledged there might have been fault on my part and decided to stop calling. Still, I couldn't shake the thought. Had my once open and communicative daughter changed so drastically? Despite my reluctance to give up on seeing my granddaughter, I continued to call about once a month. Each time, I faced a distant reception and was denied access to Harper. "Hey, are you feeling all right?" I'd ask, only to receive no reply or have the call abruptly end. Hoping to get a better sense of what was happening, I decided to call Stephen. He was my daughter's husband, and I figured he might have some insight into Madison's and Harper's situation. Stephen never answered the phone promptly, but late one night, he returned my call. "Madison? Oh yes, she's fine," Stephen assured me. "She's doing a great job looking after Harper. You don't need to worry. Madison has always been very responsible." "That's good to hear. Could you let her know I'd like to see her sometime?" I asked, hopefully. "Yes, of course," Stephen replied. "It's odd that Madison isn't picking up her phone lately. That's not like her. It's quite concerning," I added, feeling uneasy about Stephen's responses. His words felt rehearsed, as if he was trying to downplay the situation. About a month later, as autumn set in and I returned home from shopping one day, I spotted a figure sitting on my front porch. At first, I thought it might be a homeless person who had mistaken my house for somewhere else. But as I approached, I realized it was Madison. Madison. And look at that belly. And who is this child? I exclaimed in surprise as I saw Madison's noticeably larger belly, indicating she was pregnant again. "Oh, Mom." Madison's face was tired and drawn, her eyes unfocused. The child next to her clung tightly, calling out, "Mom, Mom." I realized it was Harper. I quickly unlocked the door and ushered them inside, practically carrying them to the living room sofa. I made some hot milk for them to drink. Harper cautiously sipped the warm milk. "It's cooled down now, so it's safe," I reassured her. Harper drank, leaving a white ring around her mouth. Turning to Madison, I started asking questions. "What happened? Why were you sitting outside like that? Where's Stephen? What's going on with your home?" Madison began to cry and look down for a while before speaking. Take your time, I comforted her, rubbing her back gently. After a moment, she explained that as her second pregnancy progressed, she found it increasingly difficult to manage household chores and take care of Harper, which frustrated Stephen. He had driven them to the front of my house and left them there. Seeing Madison heavily pregnant and upset made me furious, imagining what could have happened if I hadn't been home. I immediately called Stephen. He hadn't mentioned anything about Madison's pregnancy during our last conversation, which would have prompted me to offer help sooner. After several rings, he answered with a tired voice. "Hello, Stephen. What's this I hear about you leaving Madison and Harper outside my house just now?" I asked, my tone filled with anger and concern. Stephen replied casually, "Well, that's how it is. Madison hasn't been keeping up with household duties lately, using her pregnancy as an excuse. Even when I come home tired, there's no dinner ready." I was taken aback by his nonchalant response, feeling a mix of disbelief and disappointment. "Not helping because you think it's all Madison's job? Don't you think you should be supporting your wife?" I challenged Stephen, my voice tinged with disbelief. "Why should I help? Household chores are Madison's responsibility. She's the housewife," Stephen replied dismissively. "I have my own work to focus on. It's only natural she takes care of the house." "Madison is pregnant, Stephen. It's not fair to expect her to manage everything alone without any appreciation from you," I countered, trying to reason with him. "Pregnancy isn't an illness. Many pregnant women work remotely just fine at our company. And as for Harper, all kids have their moments. Comparing her to someone else's child isn't fair." Stephen sighed dramatically over the phone. "An overweight wife and noisy kids are a hassle. Let the parents deal with them for a while." At that moment, I realized it was pointless to continue the conversation. "Fine by me," I said firmly, hanging up. Stephen's mocking laughter lingered in my ears before the call ended. Suppressing my anger and frustration, I focused on what truly mattered, taking care of Madison and Harper. Harper's clothes were stained with food and juice spills, turning into little spots. Her hair also had a faint smell, so my first priority was giving her a bath. The spare clothes in the carry case were slightly dirty too. "We'll need to go shopping for new clothes tomorrow with Grandma," I told her gently. 3-year-old Harper was chatty, talking nonstop about her favorite foods, picture books, and characters from her favorite kids' show. Meanwhile, Madison looked exhausted and worn out from the strain of managing everything on her own. She could barely move from the couch. Quickly, I prepared fresh sheets and set up a bed in an empty room upstairs for Madison to rest. She looked worn out, with rough skin and disheveled hair, which made her look quite pitiful. "Call me if you need anything at all. I'll take care of Harper, so you just focus on resting, okay?" I assured Madison. She nodded gratefully and soon fell asleep, finally able to relax. The next 1 to 2 weeks were spent nursing Madison back to health and caring for Harper. Spending time with my granddaughter, whom I hadn't seen much until then, was incredibly fulfilling and not at all burdensome. It was difficult for me to resist when Harper would plead, "Please buy it," with that sweet voice of hers. As Madison gradually recovered, she began to open up about her past. Stephen used to be kind before we got married. He respected my opinions and we would discuss everything together. Those were the happiest times. Her voice grew somber. But after we married, he changed. He started giving orders, saying things like, "You can't rely on your parents. You have to manage all the housework perfectly." I just accepted it all. She shared that she was allowed to come back to her parents' house when Harper was born. Looking back, it felt like I was being manipulated, controlled. He even told me once that I shouldn't rely on you, Mom. "So is that why you hung up quickly when I called?" "Yes, calls with you were forbidden too, so I had to hang up quickly." "I'm really sorry," Madison explained with a mixture of regret and sadness. Later that night, after Harper had fallen asleep, we sat down with ginger tea and talked. I felt a rush of emotions, anger and sorrow mingling together. Stephen, who had once seemed so respectful when he asked for Madison's hand in marriage, now caused her so much pain and even spoke ill of her as if she were a burden. What's more, there were suspicions of him having an affair. "I've noticed perfume on him lately. It's not like him, especially not a woman's scent. And his shirts have had a sweet smell when I've done the laundry," I shared with Madison. His late nights and early mornings suddenly seemed to make sense. "Madison, you've been incredibly strong through all of this, managing the house and taking care of Harper, all while dealing with your husband's infidelity," I praised her, overwhelmed with admiration for her resilience despite everything. "Despite any disagreements, she's my daughter and family." Madison teared up quietly. The gentle autumn weather persisted, dry yet refreshing compared to summer. Madison's due date was approaching. I focused on pampering both Madison and Harper, nurturing their emotional and physical well-being. 6 months passed and spring arrived. While I was preparing lunch one day, my phone rang unexpectedly. I paused to answer it. The caller was Stephen. "Yes, this is Scarlett," I answered cautiously. "Hey, what's going on? Your house is gone." Stephen's voice sounded bewildered on the other end of the line. "Finally noticed, have you?" I replied, a hint of amusement in my voice. Stephen had arrived to pick up Madison, Harper, and the newborn only to find the house demolished and an empty lot with a "for sale" sign. The move and demolition had been completed a month ago, and Stephen seemed to have just realized the situation, prompting his panicked call to me. "We've moved. You left Madison, Harper, and the baby in my care for half a year. Have you been aware of that?" I questioned pointedly. "Yeah, I've come to pick them up now." "Where are you?" Stephen asked urgently. "Come to pick them up? Unfortunately, we've relocated to a secure apartment. There's no point in telling you where. I'm not considering returning them to you," I responded firmly. "Don't joke with me. I told my parents I'd bring Harper and the baby over. Give me back the kids at least," Stephen insisted, his tone unsettling as he referred to the children almost as possessions. "That's a promise you made on your own. It doesn't concern us, so we won't comply. I'm busy now, so if you don't mind." Just then, the baby started crying, the sound audible through the phone. Stephen seemed to react softly, saying, "Oh." Ignoring him, I hung up and hurried to change the baby's diaper in the next room. I could hear Madison's phone conversation faintly. "Yes, hello, what?" Her voice carried a hint of frustration, likely arguing with Stephen. Soon after, Harper emerged from her room, looking scared. "Mom is angry," she whispered anxiously. "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything will be fine," I assured her, pulling her into a comforting hug. About 10 minutes later, the commotion quieted down, and Madison joined us. It was Stephen. He was demanding our new address, but I refused outright. "I don't care if he wants to show Harper and the baby to his parents," she sighed, reflecting on his persistence. "But maybe it was for the best he called." I finally got to say what I've been wanting to. Regarding the lawyer, the issue at hand was Stephen's infidelity. During that call, I informed him that we would proceed with a divorce through a lawyer, and I would also seek alimony due to his affair. I also sent proof of his infidelity to his father, Madison recounted calmly. Over the past 6 months, we had hired a detective to investigate Stephen's behavior, and the evidence confirmed his unfaithfulness. With 2 young children to consider, Madison couldn't overlook this betrayal. Stephen was caught off guard by Madison's knowledge of his affair and was visibly shaken. He must have been pale with shock when he realized his parents were aware of the evidence. Outraged, he exclaimed, "How could you do this?" "But those were my terms," I replied firmly. Given his parents' strict nature, I anticipated they would not take his actions lightly. Madison's prediction proved correct. A meeting was arranged with Stephen's parents to discuss his conduct. During the meeting, they apologized to Madison and accepted the divorce proceedings. Stephen's father, despite his son being a potential future company president, expressed his anger and disappointment, stating that a man who cheats on his wife and neglects his children is unworthy of such responsibilities. As a result, he dismissed Stephen from his position within the company. In the end, Stephen faced serious consequences. He lost his position and gave up custody of his children, allowing Madison and me to raise them. He was required to pay compensation and child support, but struggled due to debts accrued from supporting his affair partner. Although he found another job, the salary was modest, forcing him to move into a small, inexpensive apartment. After losing his shot at becoming president, Stephen's affair partner callously abandoned him. It became clear she was more interested in his title than him as a person. Despite multiple attempts to reconnect and reconcile, Madison cut off contact with Stephen, and their divorce was finalized smoothly. Madison became a single parent, but found strength in raising her children who thrived under her care. Despite the rift, Stephen's father, feeling remorseful, continued to support Harper and her sibling beyond the agreed child support. Despite Madison and my initial refusals, he insisted, and we accepted it for the children's future. We also kept Stephen's parents updated with photos and videos of their grandchildren, and occasionally video called when schedules allowed. Seeing Harper and her sibling grow up brought joy to Stephen's parents, who cherished their role as grandparents deeply. Harper's days at preschool were filled with joy, especially with her mud and sand playtime with friends. One sunny afternoon, I arrived to pick her up and noticed she was clutching a rolled-up piece of drawing paper. "What's that, Harper?" I asked curiously. She hesitated shyly before replying, "It's a picture of Mom." The preschool teacher had assigned them to draw portraits as gifts for their mothers that day. Although Harper was too bashful to show me the drawing right away, she eagerly rushed home and presented it to Madison. While I couldn't see the portrait myself, Madison was deeply moved and praised Harper's thoughtfulness. It was a touching moment that showcased Harper's growing individuality. Thinking about her future fills me with hope and excitement. Living together as a family of 4, experiencing this happiness, feels like nothing short of a miracle. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I shouted because there he was, lying in an old, worn-out tent in the yard under the blazing sun. It reminded me of the tents from my childhood. "Ah, don't worry about it. It's the usual thing," Dad replied weakly, leaving me speechless. Since he hurt his leg, he's been living with my brother and his wife. Whenever I called, my brother said Dad was fine, and his wife would laugh and say she was taking good care of him. They told me I couldn't talk to Dad because he wasn't good with technology and had made new friends at the hospital, so he was enjoying life. But seeing Dad lying there looking so weak, I realized my brother and his wife were lying. Dad slowly raised his hand and pointed toward a direction. I saw my home. I'm single and my parents' house is in the city, but I moved to the countryside to work at a resort hotel, chasing my dream. My parents had a car accident 2 years ago. Only Mom died, but Dad injured his leg and got really depressed after losing her. They were always together and known as a loving couple in the neighborhood. Dad liked staying home, but he would travel because Mom loved it. On the way back from one of their trips, they had the accident, and only Dad survived. "Why did I survive instead of her?" Dad would say, feeling guilty every day. His injury made him stay indoors even more. Since I was working, I couldn't take care of him as much as I wanted. Seeing him so sad made me feel terrible, but luckily I have a brother who is 7 years older than me. My brother Anthony and his wife, Mia, live close to our parents' home and would check on us sometimes. "Dad's gotten a lot weaker, hasn't he?" I said. They were a loving couple after all. "It's understandable. We live nearby, so Emma, don't worry and focus on your work," Anthony replied. "Thank you," I said, feeling grateful. Lately, I've been affected by the recession and my income has dropped a lot. I need to start saving soon. "How about you, Emma?" Anthony asked with a sigh. "I'm actually doing pretty well. Thanks to tourists coming back, I've been really busy lately. Unlike my brother, the overtime pay has helped a lot, so I haven't been struggling financially. In fact, I've had a raise and think I'm earning more than most of my peers. However, not having private time has been tough." This was the first time my brother had talked about his financial situation. He said they've had to cut back on food expenses and are barely getting by each day. He hasn't bought clothes in over a year, and they haven't gone on any trips either. They wanted children, but with their current situation, it's not possible. I was worried they were really struggling. Then, during a conversation at his house, Anthony mentioned, "Dad's leg has gotten much worse, and he needs more support. We're thinking about living together so we can take care of him." Mia added, "We were thinking it would save us money, and we could take care of Dad at the same time." "I appreciate it. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help," I said gratefully. "Thank you, Emma. Good luck with your work," Maya replied warmly. So to save money and look after Dad, my brother and his wife decided to move in with him. Dad and my brother didn't have the best relationship to start with. When Anthony was a student, he used to come home late, and Dad would often scold him. Over time, they drifted apart, and after Anthony finished college, he rarely visited. I hadn't seen them talk much since Anthony became an adult, so it was surprising that he was now positive about living with Dad. It seemed clear they were facing financial difficulties. The idea of saving on rent and living costs made sense, especially since I, living alone, understood the appeal. But I couldn't help feeling anxious about whether they would truly take good care of Dad, especially since I couldn't visit home often due to work. I regularly called Anthony instead. "Hey Anthony, how's Dad doing?" "He's been smiling more these days. I feel bad leaving all the caregiving to you. It must be tough. It's been 3 months now, and we've adjusted to living together." At first, I was worried, but it seemed my brother and his wife were committed to taking care of Dad, so I could focus on my work without worries. Several years passed, and after summer vacation ended, I decided to visit my hometown for the first time in a while. I called Anthony beforehand to let them know I was coming. "Hey Anthony, it's been a while." "Oh, it has been. How are you? Think you'll be able to come home this year?" Anthony asked cheerfully. "Yeah, things have settled down at work, so I'm planning to come home for a few days," I replied. "That's great to hear. Travel safely," he said. "Thanks. Please let Dad and Mia know I'm coming," I said before hanging up. I tried calling Dad too, but couldn't reach him. I let Anthony know and finally headed home for the first time in years. It was the longest I had been away since Mom passed away. I used to worry about Dad and tried to visit during holidays, but I hadn't been able to in a long time. Knowing Anthony and Mia were there gave me some comfort. The city home felt much hotter than where I lived. As I arrived, sweating from the heat, I noticed an unfamiliar old tent in the front yard. Was there really a tent? I wondered aloud, puzzled by its presence. Curious yet apprehensive, I approached it and sensed someone inside. Hurriedly, I made my way into the family home. "I'm back," I announced. "Welcome back, Emma. You look pale." "What's wrong?" Mia exclaimed, noticing my expression. "I think there's someone in the tent. I blurted out hastily to Mia, who had just welcomed me home. Her response caught me off guard. "Oh, that's Dad," Maya replied calmly. "What? Dad is in that tent on such a hot day?" I exclaimed, rushing to check inside. There I found Dad lying down, looking like he had collapsed. "Mia, I'm calling an ambulance. Dad seems exhausted," I said urgently. "No need to call an ambulance," Mia insisted firmly. "It's Dad's choice to live in the garden. There's nothing to worry about," she added, sounding resolute. Dad looked fatigued on such a hot day, yet he wants to live in the garden. The man who preferred being indoors even when Mom was healthy. Dad always said the best place in summer was a cool room and a warm one in winter. It didn't make sense for him to want to be outside in this heat. Something felt wrong. An uneasy feeling crept over me. I hurried to the tent where Dad was and spoke to him directly. "Dad, what happened? Are you okay?" I asked with concern. "Emma, it's nothing. Just the usual. I'm fine," Dad replied weakly. "Do you stay out here in this heat every day? Why don't you come inside?" When I pressed him, Dad pointed slowly towards the main house. "That used to be my room. Since I moved in with Anthony and Mia, I've been staying in a closet," Dad revealed, shocking me. "In a closet? I thought they were taking good care of you," I said, feeling bewildered and concerned. "Not once have they taken care of me properly. Their decision to live together was solely for their own savings," Dad revealed bitterly. "I've told them countless times how much I hate staying in the closet because of my leg," Dad continued. "Their response was to tell me if I didn't like it, I should live outside. That's why they'd left me out here in the garden with this old tent during this sweltering heat." Dad's words were a painful narrative I wished I could block out. It was now clear that there was discord between my brother and Dad. I blamed myself for trusting Anthony. Mia, too, was not the nurturing type I had hoped for. I recalled how Anthony used to complain about her frequent nights out drinking until the early hours. This couple, who boasted about dining out every single day and never cooking at home, were clearly ill-suited to taking care of Dad. Yet foolishly, I had expected more from them. "This is unacceptable. I'm here now, and I've got you," I declared firmly. It was shocking to uncover how badly they had treated Dad. Despite their assurances of good care over the phone, they had confined him to a closet and then banished him to the yard. Anger surged through me, unforgiving and intense. Ignoring Mia's protests, I dialed for an ambulance. "There's no me for that. Please, don't make a scene," my brother's wife pleaded desperately, but I paid no heed. When the ambulance arrived, they took Dad to the hospital, and I accompanied him. Dad was on the brink of heat stroke, but thankfully it wasn't life-threatening. However, due to neglect in providing proper meals and maintaining hygiene, he needed hospitalization. "Dad, rest now. Take your time to recover," I reassured him as he settled in. Then he replied, "Emma, you're my lifesaver. I was ready to join your mom every day." He looked relieved. "What are you saying? We need you here with us for much longer." Realizing Dad had been living each day as if it were his last, tears welled up in my eyes, but I kept a smile on my face for him. I returned to the family home to gather some things for Dad's hospital stay. "Anthony, Mia, you need to explain yourselves about Dad." I confronted my brother and his wife, seething with anger about how Dad had been treated. "We were just trying to push him away, hoping he'd leave on his own," Mia confessed casually. "Yeah, surprisingly he was stubborn and wouldn't leave," Anthony said casually, almost as if it were a joke. It was clear they knew they had treated Dad cruelly. They chuckled as they recounted their attempts to push him away. "Are you even hearing yourselves? Dad's life is at stake here. If anything had happened to him, you could have been held responsible," I exclaimed, unable to contain my disbelief and anger. "You're exaggerating. We did give him food and checked on him once a day," Anthony replied dismissively, as if Dad was just some animal they were dealing with. "He's in the hospital now because he wasn't properly cared for. Do you understand what you've done? It's outrageous to kick him out of his own home," I retorted, frustration evident in my voice. My brother and his wife showed no remorse and started making excuses for their actions. "We didn't choose to live here. Financial struggles forced us to move in, but caregiving turned out to be much harder than we expected," Mia explained. "That's why we considered placing him in a facility, but Dad strongly opposed leaving this house full of memories of Mom. He even tried to kick us out. They pleaded to me, casting themselves as victims. They struggled with caregiving and attempted to convince Dad to leave, but instead, they found themselves on the brink of being forced out. Having rent-free accommodation is crucial for us, so we couldn't let Dad kick us out," Anthony justified their actions. I never imagined my brother would stoop so low as to deliberately worsen Dad's care and quality of life just to secure the house for himself. Despite Dad and my brother not being close, I had trusted that as an adult in his mid-30s, he would manage Dad's care responsibly. It was terrifying to realize they had devised such a cruel strategy. Moreover, my brother confessed that by confining Dad to the closet or forcing him into the yard when I visited, they were trying to manipulate Dad into choosing to live with me instead. Living in the countryside is better for his health anyway, so we were planning to send him to live with you, my brother admitted. We thought he'd leave on his own before you got here, but he held on, Mia chuckled, as if reminiscing about a challenging game. Now that you're back, Dad will probably say he wants to live with you. Anthony laughed, casually dropping this bombshell. Then he said something outrageous. Now that Dad's in the hospital, this house belongs to us, so pack your things and leave. I was so appalled by his audacity that I was at a loss for words. To think he could say such a thing while living in someone else's house. I gathered Dad's belongings and went back to the hospital. Dad, I heard about what happened from Anthony. It must have been tough, I said gently. Dad sighed, expressing his despair. Trying to drive them out of the house backfired on me. That house is a treasure filled with memories of your mom. I couldn't just hand it over to people like them. His enduring love for Mom still gave him strength, which was reassuring. Don't worry, Dad. We'll figure this out together. You're not alone in this, I reassured him, determined to make things right for him. Don't worry about the house. We'll figure something out. You might need to stay in the hospital for a bit longer, but would you like to live with me after you're discharged? I suggested. Dad's face lit up with relief. Thank you. If you're okay with it, I'd be happy to live together. After Dad agreed to live with me, I returned to my place. 2 months later, I started receiving a barrage of calls from Anthony. There are a bunch of unknown men in the house. What's going on? Anthony demanded furiously. Without replying, I handed the phone to someone else. The person who took over was our maternal grandfather. Hey, Anthony, I've heard the story from Emma. You've done something terrible to my dear son-in-law. When grandfather spoke, Anthony sounded shocked. Our family home was actually built by grandfather as a wedding gift for Mom when she was young. Dad, who was adopted into the family, was always treated by grandfather as if he were his own son. When I told grandfather about the situation, he was furious and sent over some of his strongest apprentices to drive out my brother and his wife. After the commotion, I called grandfather, who owns the land and the house. Grandfather has always been imposing, and Anthony has always been afraid of him. I believed he could help us out of this mess. Anthony, all your stuff has been arranged to be sent to Mia's parents' house, grandfather said firmly. Don't just go ahead with things on your own, Anthony protested, though his voice was tinged with fear. You're the one who acted out of line. Now deal with the consequences, grandfather retorted sharply. A person who treated their family like that has no right to argue. Do you have any complaints? Grandfather said firmly. No, sir. I'm sorry, Anthony replied and didn't argue back. After that, grandfather was always kind to me but very strict with Anthony as he grew up. If Anthony cried, grandfather would spank him, which made him cry more and get scolded even more. What was okay in the past is now considered wrong. Watching Anthony, I often felt glad to be a girl. Even though Anthony would rebel against Dad, he never dared to go against grandfather. This time, too, he tried to resist a little, but grandfather quickly took control, showing that my brother couldn't match him. Anthony and Mia's belongings were sent to Mia's parents' house as grandfather had arranged. When they arrived, it was clear they hadn't been there in a long time. Hey Dad, I think our stuff has arrived, so we came to pick it up, Mia said. Mia's dad came out from the back room. I've heard everything from Anthony's sister. You two are going to live with us from now on. It's okay, we'll live at my family home, Mia replied. Don't even think about coming back after treating your father like that. I'll fix your bad attitude, Mia's dad said angrily. I had heard that Mia's dad was very strict. After explaining everything to him, Anthony and Mia had no choice but to live under his strict rules. Mia learned to cook from scratch and had to prepare meals for the family every day. Anthony got permission for a side job and helped Mia's dad with his work on weekends. After Dad was discharged from the hospital, grandfather told him the house needed repairs because of some damage. Determined to fix the house filled with memories of Mom, Dad committed himself to rehabilitation and recovered impressively. You did great with the rehab. The doctors were even surprised by how quickly you recovered, I said. Of course, it's the house filled with memories of your mom, so I need to put my all into fixing it. Dad replied with a brightness in his voice like in the old days. It seemed his love for Mom helped Dad recover. With grandfather's instructions and the help of his apprentices, we gradually repaired the house. While fixing the house, Dad seemed to regain the sparkle he had when Mom was alive. You seem really lively, I said. Working on the house brings back a lot of memories, and it feels like I'm talking to your mom. I felt like she had gone far away, but maybe she's been nearby all along, watching over me. Hearing Dad talk like that almost brought tears to my eyes. Despite the horrible treatment from my brother and his wife, maybe Mom really was protecting him. Eventually, the house repairs were completed. When the repairs were done, Dad decided to let go of the house. Dad, are you sure? I felt like Mom said it's okay not to cling to this house anymore. Plus, now that it's so beautifully done, I really want someone to live in it, he spoke calmly. I see. I think she would be happy too. Thanks to the renovations Dad and the team made, a buyer was quickly found. Because of all this, Dad and Grandfather decided to move into nursing homes. I've started visiting more often. Dad, how are you? I'm having a great time every day. Made a lot of friends too. It's all thanks to you, Emma. Really, thank you, Dad said with a smile. Dad seemed to be enjoying his days with the other residents, making the time I spent with him even more precious. I've been living more peacefully every day. As for Anthony and Mia, we've gotten used to Dad's discipline, and it's quite comfortable this way, Mia said. Yeah, he's not strict all the time, and the house is big. It's great, Anthony added, seeming to enjoy their lifestyle too. Being relieved from caregiving, we're actually lucky, Mia said happily. Thanks to this, we're living a good life despite our low income. I feel so grateful. My brother and his wife had adjusted to living at Mia's parents' house and were happy to be free from caregiving responsibilities, showing no signs of regret. But then Mia's dad, furious at their lack of remorse, kicked them out. There's no remorse from you, so you might as well leave, Mia's dad said quietly yet angrily. Pack your things and leave immediately. He expelled them without allowing any discussion. Accustomed to living at home without saving money, they found themselves homeless and desperate. Until they could afford the initial costs for a new place, they lived in an old tent in the park during winter. It's freezing. We're in this situation because your income is so low, Mia blamed Anthony. The tent is from home, but I bought you a new sleeping bag, so stop complaining. I've been working 7 days a week without a break, Anthony retorted irritably. With the money from his side job already spent, they had nothing left. How about we contact Emma and ask if we can live with her in the countryside? Anthony suggested without much concern. Soon after, Anthony called to inform me they had been kicked out of Mia's parents' house and were now sleeping in a cold park. My brother, who had previously made fun of my rural lifestyle, was now pleading to live with me. Knowing how badly he treated our father, I couldn't bring myself to help him, so I refused. I decided to block all future communications to avoid any further trouble. I can only hope they realize that their actions have consequences. Since you can't even do chores properly, you might as well just keep working, huh? Those words really annoyed me. Thomas used to oppose me working. He was jealous when I became a supervisor, asked me for money when I got a raise, and now he wants me to work nonstop. It's frustrating how selfish he can be. What's wrong? Got a problem? If you do, then do whatever you want, Thomas replied, seeing I was upset, with a look that said, fine, I'll do whatever I want to. I couldn't keep quiet, so I snapped back and went to bed annoyed. I was so angry at Thomas, but work doesn't stop for anyone. The next day, as soon as I got to the office, I asked for a meeting with the boss. Just like I told Thomas, I decided to do what I wanted and took on a certain task that had been suggested earlier. My name's Anna. I'm 30 years old and I married Thomas, who's also 30, about 3 years ago. We haven't had children yet, so we're both working hard and earning money. In the past, people used to expect women to stay home after marriage, but things are different now. Even though we work at different companies, we both have full-time jobs and share the household tasks. Thomas usually handles laundry and cleaning while I focus on cooking meals. Since we got married, I've been trying to cook delicious meals that Thomas enjoys. At work, I work hard to match the performance of my male colleagues, and recently I was promoted to supervisor. Being a supervisor means I have more work to do, both in quantity and quality. However, Thomas, despite being a coworker, didn't try to understand my situation. One evening at dinner, Thomas said, "Didn't we have this for dinner yesterday? Your cooking seems a bit careless these days. Please put more effort into it." Thomas is still in a lower position, not a supervisor like me. Maybe he felt jealous that I got promoted before him. Instead of being happy for me, he started complaining every day. Even though I have less free time now, I still make sure to do my part in household chores, I thought, understanding that Thomas's complaints were rooted in jealousy, so I had to remain patient. I do my best to prepare in the mornings, but sometimes dinner ends up being late when I get home, so I've been making side dishes ahead of time. Side dishes again. So you're saying dinner is the same every day? That's not what I meant. Please don't misunderstand. You're the one who said you take care of meals when we got married, right? The women at my company handle their households well, even while raising kids. I always mention that. I couldn't respond. Maybe there are such women at Thomas's workplace, but comparing ourselves to others doesn't help. Besides, the women Thomas talks about actually work part-time. It's not that I think less of part-time work, but being compared like that doesn't sit right with me. I'm sorry, I said quietly. Well, I'll forgive you this time, 'cause I'm kind, Thomas replied, starting to eat again once I apologized. I wish he'd just eat without commenting if he's going to eat anyway, but there's nothing I can do about it. When I talk about Thomas to my friends, they say it's good practice for dealing with kids. Indeed, even though we don't have children, dealing with Thomas sometimes feels like dealing with a child. I have to handle him with patience. Oh, by the way, you did the laundry, right? Thanks for that. Huh? Oh yeah, of course that was the agreement, you know. Without me the house wouldn't function, huh? I held back what I wanted to say and praised Thomas. He seemed pleased with that. Indeed, Thomas does his part of the household chores as we agreed. But when it comes to laundry, he doesn't check the care labels or use a laundry bag. He just throws everything in and presses one button for wash and dry. So sometimes Thomas complains about clothes shrinking or getting worn out. If that's what counts as doing chores properly, I wonder how well I'm actually managing. But I never expressed my dissatisfaction. The one time I did, it led to a big fight. Why didn't you quit your job and do everything yourself? That's what I said when we got married. I shouldn't have listened to anything you said, just like Betty told me. Thomas yelled angrily and insulted me, then stopped talking to me for about 2 weeks. Of course, during that time, he didn't do his share of the work, leaving me to handle everything on my own. I find it easier to endure some challenges than to feel completely drained, both mentally and physically. Indeed, as Thomas mentioned during our argument, he wasn't initially supportive of me working. Betty said there's nothing good about a married woman working outside. That's why I want you to stay at home, he told me. I don't know why Thomas's sister feels that way, but I was willing to go along with it if that's what Thomas preferred. However, it soon became clear that we couldn't manage on just Thomas's salary alone. We couldn't rely solely on ideals, we needed practical solutions, so I pleaded desperately with him to let me continue working. My company is reputable and pays well. If we both worked, we could have some financial flexibility. Reluctantly, Thomas agreed to my heartfelt plea, which led us to where we are now. Despite everything, whether reluctantly or not, Thomas did share in the household chores. It's true that even that much help was appreciated. As Thomas's birthday approached, we hadn't done anything lavish to celebrate since we got married. Normally, we would mark the occasion at home with my cooking. But this year, with my recent promotion and salary increase, I decided to treat him to a dinner at a hotel. On the day itself, after buying him a gift, Thomas was pleasantly surprised and thoroughly enjoyed the steak dinner. "This is the best meal I've ever had, but are you sure we can afford this?" he asked. "It's your special day. I got a raise since becoming a supervisor and will budget more carefully from now on. No need to worry about the side dishes, all right?" We shared a joke and ended the day that way. Yet, I didn't notice the smug smile on Thomas's face at that moment. A few days later, Thomas asked, "Hey, you mentioned your salary went up, right? How much of a raise did you get as a supervisor?" He kept bringing it up after his birthday. Supervisor seemed like a touchy subject we both avoided, but as soon as he heard about the raise, his attitude changed quickly. "Being a supervisor is great. You've worked hard for it." He started praising me like that. At first, I was surprised by his sudden shift and just gave a small smile to downplay it. But he kept pressing about the salary. I continued to dodge the topic, but when I kept avoiding him, he sulked. "What's wrong? Feeling superior now that you're a supervisor? Maybe you look down on me, just an employee at a small company. It was just a treat for your birthday. We're not wealthy, so let's not keep talking about money." I finally snapped, and that stopped his persistence. But it was clear Thomas was fixated on my income. If I had known it would lead to this, maybe I wouldn't have become a supervisor or celebrated his birthday. There was some regret, but it wasn't all bad. Since becoming a supervisor, I've been given an important project. Even though it means more work, Thomas has been supportive. "You're a supervisor and busy with work. I'll do what I can," he said, even preparing dinner, even if it was just frozen meals. Despite his focus on money, his effort made that birthday special, perhaps. Later, when the project settled down, Thomas asked eagerly, "So you've been busy, you must be getting a special bonus, right?" I was taken aback by his question. "No, why would there be a bonus?" I replied wearily, surprised. Then Thomas erupted. "Months of overtime and no bonus. What was the point of me helping then? What a lousy company." I didn't have the energy to argue back. Is there supposed to be a deeper meaning behind a couple's cooperation? The idea of him criticizing someone's company was hard to believe. That was the moment I couldn't hold back anymore. What I meant was, I appreciated your help, but is this what you really think? I responded, and Thomas fired back. This led to a heated argument. "Enough, let's stop. I'm tired and going to sleep," I said, ending the conversation abruptly. After that, I couldn't bear to look at Thomas for a while. Sometime later, I had to go on a business trip. We hadn't spoken since the argument, but I needed to inform him since I would be away. "I'll be gone for 2 nights and 3 days on a business trip. Please take care while I'm away," I told him. However, perhaps still upset, Thomas didn't respond. Without resolving things, I left for my trip. Busy with work for 3 days, I found myself wondering about Thomas during my breaks. Was he eating well? I worried, but my pride stopped me from reaching out. Being apart helped me calm down, and I planned to apologize upon my return. When I returned after 3 days of work, I brought back some tasty souvenirs and headed home. I'm back, I announced upon entering, but something felt strange right away. There were many unfamiliar pairs of shoes by the door, and the scent of cooking filled the air, not the usual frozen meals, but the unmistakable aroma of home-cooked food. Thomas can't cook, I thought, rushing into the living room. Oh, Anna, welcome back, Betty greeted me. What are you doing here? I asked, surprised to see Thomas's sister, Betty, in our kitchen. As I glanced around, I noticed Thomas's niece, Lisa, lounging on the couch as if she belonged there. It didn't seem like a casual visit. It looked like they had moved in. Even the couch seemed new, not the one we had before my trip. I stood at the living room entrance, completely bewildered by the scene unfolding before me. Dinner will be ready soon, Betty said casually, while I continued to stare at her in disbelief. I walked over to Thomas, sitting in a chair in the living room, and asked him, "What's happening, Thomas?" "It's a big decision to live with Betty and Lisa now. The move is already done," Thomas said casually, acting like it was the most natural thing. "That's what's happening, so let's all get along," Betty added with a smile. But I couldn't find it in me to smile back. Moving their stuff in without asking, deciding to live together without discussing it first. "Hold on, you can't just decide this on your own," I protested. "What's the issue? You're always too busy with overtime to handle housework anyway. It's easier if we live together and Betty takes care of things," Thomas retorted to my objections. Betty had Lisa when she was 20 and got divorced a few years later. Since then, she's been a single mother raising Lisa, who is now 18, all on her own. I knew this, and I knew Thomas cared deeply for his older sister, Betty, but I never expected it would lead to us living together. "Come on, Anna," Betty said confidently. "Nice to meet you," Lisa murmured quietly. My head was throbbing, but I couldn't accept the situation silently. "I'm sorry, but I can't live with all of you," I said firmly. However, Thomas laughed at me as if it were a joke. "Why not? Since you can't even handle housework properly, you might as well keep working, right?" His words irritated me. It was Thomas who initially opposed me working, jealous of my promotion, then relied on my salary increase. And now he was telling me to keep working. It was unbelievable and selfish. "What's the matter? Got a complaint?" "If you do, then do whatever you want," Thomas retorted with a frown, sensing my irritation. "Fine, I'll do whatever I want then." But I was the one who wanted to be angry. I couldn't keep quiet, so I told Thomas how I felt. After that, we didn't speak, and I went to bed. Betty and Lisa apparently decided to give up their own place and moved into our home, bringing their bed with them. They turned the room that was supposed to be for our future children into their room without asking me. I felt more sadness than anger. But work couldn't wait. The next day, as soon as I arrived, I asked for a meeting with the director. I decided to take on a task that HR had proposed earlier. "That's wonderful. I appreciate you taking it on. It's a great opportunity, so I'll give it my all," I promised the director, fully engrossed in my work. I found it more comforting to be at the office than at home. Unable to forgive Thomas, a few days later he messaged me, "Hey Anna, how long are you going to keep sulking? Just come back already." I had been going home, but only when everyone was asleep, leaving before anyone woke up. However, for the past few days, I hadn't even returned home because I found a new place to live. "Come back. You can't just do that," he replied, laughing. "I can't come back right away," I said. "Why not?" "I'm in Italy right now. It's the middle of the night here. And Betty's there to take care of the house, right?" "Huh?" Thomas paused, surprised by my tired response. It was night for him, but already the middle of the night where I was. Dealing with this conversation with Thomas after work was just training. Finally understanding, Thomas suddenly raised his voice. "What? Italy? You went on a trip without telling us?" "It's not a trip. I've been living here for the past 3 days. What are you talking about?" But my response seemed to confuse Thomas again. "Again? Didn't you say I could do whatever I wanted?" I could almost picture him stunned on the other end of the phone. "What I meant is, you told me to do whatever I wanted, and I did. So I accepted the assignment in Italy that was offered to me earlier. They've set up a condo for me, and it's a beautiful place," I explained. "There's a limit to doing whatever you want. This affects our life together, and you decided on your own." Thomas sounded upset. Surely if we had talked about it, we might have decided to move here together. But this assignment in Italy was like a reward for my hard work. Thomas was the one who got upset about the bonus and didn't listen to other things. Yet didn't it feel strange for him to say he decided on his own to live with Betty and Lisa? His own words were coming back to him. "Did you even discuss anything with me that affects our life together?" I questioned. "Well, I'll be working here and I'll return to the States as a manager in 2 years. Until then, enjoy life with Betty and her family, I concluded before hanging up. Thomas must be feeling uneasy now, his own actions and words preventing him from living abroad. A few days later, Thomas contacted me, wondering what it was about. I answered, and he sounded cheerful. Guess where I am? I don't care. I'm working. I'm hanging up, I replied dismissively. Believe it or not, I'm in front of your condo, he said. Huh? I was surprised by his words. He had called my work to get my address, claiming it was necessary for some procedures, and using that address, he had come over on his own. What about your work? I asked. I took some time off and yep, I'm here too, said Betty's voice over the phone. Why she had come too was beyond me. I was exasperated. So we're both waiting out here. Hurry home, said Thomas. Both? What about Lisa? Lisa has a test, so she couldn't come, Betty said casually, leaving me astonished once again. Is that so? But I won't be returning today. I have a dinner meeting far away, I replied. Even if they had contacted me earlier, I wasn't in the mood to entertain them on such short notice. I had a social gathering with another company and had no plans to go home. Huh? What should we do? Thomas sounded panicked, but that wasn't my concern. Stay at a hotel or something. Anyway, that's the situation. Also, I'm in the middle of work. Bye. I hung up the phone. They might be causing a commotion, but I didn't have time for it. They would probably give up and look for a hotel. However, I had underestimated the situation. In the middle of the social gathering, my phone rang. I excused myself and answered the phone, puzzled by the unfamiliar number. It turned out to be from the police. Excuse me, but apparently there was an intruder at my house, looking for an open window. They found one in the pet door. I didn't own a pet, so I hadn't noticed it before, but the house built by my company had one. Of course, I had no idea it even existed, so it wasn't locked. The intruder tried to enter through it and got stuck, unable to move forward or back, and was spotted by a passerby who then called the police. What a foolish burglar. Encountering such a fool could be dangerous. I was relieved I wasn't home at the time. The person claims to be your sister. Do you know anything about this? I went pale at those words. Sister. I don't have a sister. The only possibility was Thomas's sister, Betty. As expected, the police mentioned her name. I was mortified. Unbelievable that she tried to force her way through such a small entrance. It made family relations embarrassing. Anna, help me. Come pick me up. I could hear Betty causing a scene over the phone. What a nuisance. Although I could have gone to pick her up, I told the police, she may be my sister-in-law, but I can't forgive her for trying to break it in my house. Please thoroughly investigate what she intended to do in my home. The police responded to my complaint, and Betty was severely reprimanded. However, due to her lack of Italian language skills, there was a lot of confusion and stress, which made her break down crying. You must not cause trouble for your sister anymore, a police officer told her in simple English. Okay, Betty tearfully repeated. Getting caught by the police in Italy must have been a good lesson for her. Out of a desire for her to truly reflect, I didn't go to pick her up on the day she contacted me. The next day, thinking she might have reflected, I went to pick her up, and Betty broke down crying in relief. At that moment, I wondered, where was Thomas during all this? Only Betty was caught. Thomas was likely relaxing in a hotel, which I hadn't really considered. It turned out that while Betty was being arrested, Thomas was enjoying a meal alone, thinking Betty would bring money from my house and spending extravagantly at a restaurant. Oblivious to Betty's arrest, he ended up getting drunk and falling asleep at the restaurant. The restaurant, concerned about Thomas not responding, called the police, and he woke up in an unfamiliar police station. However, since my house and the restaurant were in different areas, Thomas was taken to a different police station. My wallet, my passport, where's my phone? Unfortunately, while he was unconscious, his bag was stolen and he lost his wallet, passport, and phone. Thomas couldn't speak Italian and was arrested for dining and dashing, unable to seek assistance and ending up in police custody. I only realized Thomas was missing after Betty was released and asked about him. After learning the details and following Betty's account to the restaurant, I found out from the owner that Thomas had been taken by the police. When we visited the police station, Thomas, looking pale and emotional, broke down in tears when he heard our names. It felt like déjà vu. I explained the situation to the restaurant owner, settled the bill, and apologized. Despite the theft, the owner, feeling sympathetic towards Thomas, decided not to press charges for the dine and dash. However, what followed was a hassle. We had to go through procedures for the lost passport and contact the embassy because of Betty and Thomas. I couldn't focus on work for several days. Just when I was about to explode with frustration, Thomas casually remarked, "I thought everything was settled. I'm glad it worked out. Let's go back to Anna's place for now." Their nonchalant attitude infuriated me. Glad? This is not okay for me at all. After causing so much trouble, how can you call this a good outcome? "I'm sorry, but maybe it's best if you return to your own home and don't come here again." My outburst silenced them both. "I'm filing for divorce this weekend," I declared firmly. Thomas reacted with shock, and Betty stood beside him, equally taken aback, glancing between us. "There's no point in staying married to you." Betty moved in without asking, got arrested in Italy without knowing the language, and disrupted my work. It seemed they finally grasped the seriousness of my anger. With their heads down, they stayed silent, while onlookers chuckled at two adults being scolded by a woman. But my anger was far from subsiding. "So I'm divorcing you. You don't have any objections, right?" I asserted, feeling entitled to live my life freely after rescuing him from the police. Thomas reluctantly agreed, reflecting on his actions, and responded quietly. Initially, Thomas had requested a 4-day leave from work, but due to his arrest and lost passport, he missed his return flight by a wide margin. Without a phone, he couldn't extend his leave and completely overlooked his work responsibilities. What's worse, he hadn't shared any information about his ongoing project, intending to take all the credit himself. His delayed return and lack of communication caused him to miss a crucial meeting, resulting in the cancellation of important deals with a client. Despite the significant losses incurred by the company, Thomas was fired. Betty, furious over this situation, had a heated argument with Thomas. Originally, Thomas quitting his job and moving in as a housekeeper resembled what happened. However, things took a turn with Thomas divorcing me and losing his job. With no income provider, our home became a place of frequent and intense arguments. Why? I understand all of this thanks to Lisa sharing details with me. "Children can't choose their parents, but if I could, I'd choose you over Mom," she told me. Divorcing Thomas meant that Lisa and I were no longer related by marriage, but she still reaches out to me for career advice and to discuss her mom, treating me like a sister. I'm glad she sees me that way. Even though we don't see each other often, I'm continuing to work in Italy. Originally, I planned to return to America after 2 years, but now I've decided to stay and continue working here. I've also developed a strong bond with a man I met locally. I'm ready to leave behind the difficult memories and the beautiful surroundings of Italy and pursue new happiness.
I'm 29 years old, and I recently got a call from my mom. I hadn't talked to her in almost 5 years. She said she needed my help because my sister and her husband had just gone through a tragedy. Here's some background. The man who is now my sister's husband was once supposed to be my husband. My sister Melissa, who's 27, got together with my fiancé Lucas, 29, on the day of my engagement. Lucas and I had been together since college, and he proposed to me after almost 5 years of dating. He threw a surprise party for us on the night of our engagement. I remember feeling on top of the world until around 1 p.m. when I went out into the backyard for better reception and saw my sister all over Lucas. They were kissing so passionately that for the first couple of seconds, they didn't even notice me standing there shocked. I couldn't believe he would do this to me after nearly 5 years together, especially on the night of our engagement. When they finally noticed me, they broke apart instantly, but the damage was done. I ran to my car, drove to the nearest hotel, and hyperventilated from shock. I desperately hoped what I saw wasn't real. Then Melissa texted me, apologizing but confessing she was in love with Lucas, and this had been going on for a long time. I was alone in a hotel room when I got that text and broke down completely. Soon after, Lucas texted me with a similar apology, saying he proposed to me hoping it would help him forget Melissa. But it hadn't worked. He said it wasn't about me. They believed they were meant to be together. I realized I was just a temporary stand-in for Lucas until he could be with Melissa. I stayed at the hotel for a couple of days, trying to pull myself together. I felt like I was losing my mind, hoping this was all some cruel joke. After almost 4 days, I went back home because I needed to collect my things and couldn't risk losing my job. When I arrived home, I found out my family had been living with Lucas all this time, waiting for me to return. It would have been touching if it wasn't for how I had left. Everyone had been trying to reach me with texts while I was gone, but I hadn't responded to any of them. So when I finally returned, there was chaos. Everyone hugged me and told me how relieved they were to see me. Even Melissa came up to me, tears in her eyes, and hugged me tightly. I was too numb to react and stood there silently while everyone surrounded me. Finally, after everyone had settled down, I cleared my throat and explained that I had returned only to pack my things and leave for good. Lucas had been silent until then, but when I mentioned moving out, he spoke up, saying he had already packed and planned to move in with Melissa now that everything was out in the open. To my surprise, my family, my parents, my aunt, and my dad's youngest sister were all smiling broadly despite the situation. Even though I couldn't see any reason to smile, they seemed happy. Melissa stood beside Lucas in an awkward hug, looking at me sadly but with a smile on her face. I couldn't bear it any longer. I asked my family why they were smiling. From my perspective, Melissa had just broken up my engagement and taken my boyfriend of nearly 5 years. There was nothing funny or sweet about what had happened. At that moment, my mother decided to speak up. She said they couldn't change the past but could accept the future, which now included Melissa and Lucas together. Even though their relationship started with betrayal, they felt sorry about it but believed it was for the best. Melissa apologized for taking Lucas from me and expressed regret that I found out this way. She explained they were deeply in love and wanted to be together forever. Then, right in front of me, they kissed, and my mother even wiped a tear from her eye. I couldn't hold back. I told them this wasn't a sentimental moment and their actions were disgusting. To my surprise, my family seemed annoyed with me. They accused me of being bratty and self-centered. Instead of being happy for Melissa, they said I was making everything about myself, and they didn't approve of my behavior. I was shocked by their attitude and immediately demanded everyone leave my house. I couldn't believe they were defending Melissa and Lucas while making me out to be the villain. They acted like my feelings were an overreaction. My father intervened, telling me to stop acting like a child and accept that these things happen. He wanted me to celebrate Melissa finding her soulmate instead of feeling jealous. Their behavior seemed insane to me, and I couldn't handle it anymore. So I decided to leave again without speaking to them or listening to their pleas. Even as they called after me, I kept going. I felt like there was nothing left to say because it was clear they cared more about Melissa's happiness than about me or what was right. They were so focused on justifying Melissa's actions that they forgot I was a person with real emotions. After that day, my family tried reaching out to me multiple times, but I chose not to respond because I didn't feel I owed them anything. A few weeks later, I even received an invitation to Melissa and Lucas's wedding, which I declined, of course. Many of our mutual friends also turned down the invitation in solidarity with me. Even some relatives who knew the truth stopped interacting with my family after seeing how they treated me. It's been 5 years now, and I've mostly cut them out of my life completely. They occasionally try to reconnect by sending me birthday or New Year wishes, but I always ignore them. I didn't block them, but I did remove them from my social media connections. Since my profiles are public, they can see what I'm doing, which is intentional. I want them to see that I'm living a great life and feel a pang of jealousy. It might be petty, but it's the least I can do after how they treated me. Until recently, I had little idea of what my family had been up to over the past few years. About 4 days ago, my mother called me from an unfamiliar number. When I recognized her voice, I almost hung up immediately, but she pleaded with me desperately for a chance to talk, saying they were in urgent need of help. Out of sheer humanity, I agreed to listen for a few minutes. She explained that Melissa and Lucas had started their own business a couple of years ago, but it was failing miserably. Investors were pulling out because of the lack of profit. They had borrowed more money in hopes of turning things around, but it only added to their debt. Now they were deeply in debt and facing pressure from loan sharks, employees, investors, and other creditors. My mother knew I lived a comfortable lifestyle and turned to me as a last resort, begging me to loan Melissa and Lucas money to pay off their debts. She asked for nearly $75,000. I questioned why Melissa hadn't asked me directly for help and why my mother was speaking for her. My mother explained that Melissa and Lucas didn't want her to approach me. They hadn't told me about their financial troubles because of our history from 5 years ago. Melissa wasn't ready to accept help from me, but my mother didn't know anyone else who could lend them such a large sum at short notice. A couple of months had passed and Melissa and Lucas were struggling to make ends meet, even for basic necessities. My parents and Lucas's family were doing their best to support them, but their resources were limited. Both families were retired and needed to secure their own futures, so giving away their savings wasn't feasible. With no other options left, my mother called me to ask for help. I could afford to help them financially, but I didn't want to. Melissa was right not to ask me directly after what happened between us. They forfeited any right to expect anything from me when they betrayed me. I told my mother firmly that I couldn't and wouldn't help them. She sounded hurt and argued that I was being heartless and needed to think about our family. I replied that Melissa and Lucas didn't consider me when they had their affair, and my family didn't consider my feelings while supporting them. so I saw no reason to consider them now either. I had worked really hard to get where I am today, and I wasn't going to just give away $75,000 to people who didn't deserve it. Then, my mom called and started crying, saying she never thought I'd become so selfish. She said my sister and her husband would be in big trouble if I didn't help them. I told her I couldn't help, and I hung up. Since then, my mom has been texting me nonstop, begging me to change my mind and think about my sister. She said it wasn't the time for revenge and that my sister was in serious trouble. She thinks I'll regret not helping her in the future. It's really stressful, and I don't know what to do because I don't want to be seen as the bad person. Am I wrong for not helping my sister financially after she stole my fiancé 5 years ago? Update. So I finally decided to block my family. I didn't do it sooner because I wanted them to see how well I was doing and maybe feel envious. Also, I worried I might regret cutting them off if something bad happened to them. But now, I just don't care. I should have cut ties with them 5 years ago. I don't know why I kept them around for so long. That was my mistake. Refusing to help my sister now isn't about being petty. It just makes sense. They've already wasted a lot of money, and even if I gave them some now, they probably wouldn't be able to pay it back. $75,000 is a lot of money even for someone like me who's doing well financially. If I lend that much, I expect it back even from close friends. But these people aren't close to me, and I can't count on them to repay me. So there's no reason for me to give them money. It's that simple. I talked to a few friends about it, and they agreed I made the right call. It's not about revenge, it's just not practical to help them after how they treated me in the past. Now that my mother can't contact me anymore, I don't have to worry about feeling guilty. Update 2. Hey everyone, something pretty intense happened today. I was at work when my neighbor called to say there was a couple outside my house causing a scene, yelling for me to come out and talk to them. She said they seemed unstable and had been there for an hour, refusing to leave. I asked for a description, and deep down, I knew it was Melissa and Lucas. My neighbor insisted I come home to handle the situation, and I agreed. With Melissa and Lucas, trouble always followed. I thanked her and rushed home to make sure they didn't get inside my house. I got home in about 15 minutes and caught them trying to break into my house by picking the lock. I parked in front of my place and asked them what they were doing. I tried to call the police, but Lucas knocked the phone out of my hand. Melissa then said they were only here to talk and didn't want anything from me, at least not right now. I told them to make it quick and insisted we stay outside in the yard. I didn't feel comfortable inviting them inside, especially since they seemed hostile despite claiming they didn't want anything from me. Melissa began speaking. She said my mother had told her about the phone call I ignored and how I had blocked them all. She accused me of being unfair and said it had been 5 years since the incident with my fiancé, so I should have moved on by now. She claimed I was acting dramatically to get attention from the family and felt insulted by my refusal to help them. That's why she wanted to talk to me. She explained that she had managed to gather the money this time by selling their house and jewelry, but she might need more in the future. Melissa said she needed assurance that I would be there to help again. I firmly told her no. I made it clear she couldn't rely on me because I deeply dislike her and her husband. I was so furious that I even mentioned how close I was to hitting her, so they should leave immediately. Then Lucas demanded that I sign a document promising to give them money whenever they asked. I couldn't believe it. I knew it wouldn't be legally binding if I signed it under duress. They were being unreasonable and seemed to think they could manipulate me into doing something like that. I ordered both of them to leave, but Melissa pushed me and insisted that I had to help them because we were family, and I couldn't avoid my responsibilities like this. I was shocked by her push, and I almost slapped her in response, but I managed to restrain myself because I knew it would only escalate things. Instead, I quickly grabbed my phone from the ground where Lucas had knocked it, and I ran to my car. I jumped in and drove off without even looking back. Since I had left the engine running earlier, I was able to speed away quickly. They didn't attempt to chase me on foot, so they stayed at my house, which was unfortunate for them. Once I was a safe distance away, I called the police and explained the situation. I hurried back home and arrived just in time for the police to show up. In less than 20 minutes, I gave them all the details, and they arrested Melissa and Lucas. I knew the charges might not be severe, but it was worth it to have them taken away and not have to deal with them anymore. It's been a few hours since then, and surprisingly, I haven't heard from anyone in my family. I thought someone might try to contact me from a different number by now, but they haven't. It makes me think they might be done with the situation and won't bother me again. Or maybe they're waiting for things to calm down before reaching out. Update 3. Hi, it's been about a week since my last update. I had started to think my family might leave me alone after I called the police on Melissa and Lucas. But I was wrong. They still found a way to bother me, and this time it was my parents who came to my house, asking if they could talk to me. This happened yesterday, and they seemed much more humble compared to Melissa and Lucas, so I allowed them in. My mother started crying as soon as she came in, apologizing for taking Melissa's side over mine in the past. My father said that after hearing about Melissa and Lucas getting arrested for their actions, including pushing me, they couldn't see them the same way anymore. They decided to cut them off. My mother continued crying throughout her visit while my father apologized for siding with Melissa instead of me in the past. I thanked them for finally realizing their mistake, but I explained that it was too late to repair our relationship. I've grown accustomed to living life on my own terms, and I'm not willing to prioritize my family over myself anymore. I appreciated their visit and apology, but I couldn't promise to work on our relationship. They tried to argue that we could fix things if we tried, but the truth was I no longer wanted to try. I just wanted to focus on myself. They seemed disappointed but eventually left, asking if I could at least unblock them so we could stay in touch. I've unblocked my parents now, which feels strange, but that's where things stand. I lay on the cold kitchen floor, holding my side where I felt sharp pain spreading through my body. It felt like a knife was twisting inside me. My 7-year-old daughter, Lily, stood nearby, her small face showing how scared she was. "Mommy, are you okay?" Lily's voice shook, barely louder than a whisper. I tried to sound calm despite the pain. "I'll be fine, honey, just a bad stomach ache," I lied, trying to hide how serious it was. Footsteps echoed through the hallway as my husband David appeared in the doorway. His face showed annoyance instead of concern. He was ready for his trip, holding his suitcase. "What's going on, Evelyn? Why are you on the floor?" David asked, sounding annoyed. "I think it's appendicitis, David. It's really bad. We need to go to the hospital," I managed to say, each word hurting me. He scoffed. "Appendicitis? You're probably overreacting. It's likely just indigestion." "But David, I really think..." My words were cut off by a sharp pain, making me wince. David checked his watch, clearly impatient. "I can't miss this trip with Rachel. Just call a taxi or something." I couldn't believe it. "David, I can't even move. Lily's here. I need you," I begged, desperation in my voice. He shook his head, not caring. "I'm sure it's nothing. Call if it gets worse." And with that, he left, his suitcase trailing behind him. I was left alone in pain with Lily. Lily's small hands found mine, her tears matching my own. "Mommy, don't be sick. You have to be okay." I gathered what little strength I had and pulled Lily close. "I'm here, darling. Mommy's here." With David gone, I knew I had to act. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and called the only person I knew I could count on, my brother Michael. The phone rang, its sound piercing the quiet kitchen. "Hello," Michael's voice came through, a beacon of hope. "Michael, it's Evelyn. I need help. I think it's appendicitis. I can't move and Lily is scared," I managed to say, each word a struggle. There was a brief silence, then Michael's voice, calm and steady. "I'm on my way. Hold tight, Evelyn. I'll be there soon." Leaning against the cold tile floor, I closed my eyes, trying to endure the pain. Lily nestled close to me, a small comfort in the midst of turmoil. In that moment, a determination grew inside me. David's abandonment during my crisis wouldn't be forgotten. It was a deep hurt, a betrayal that marked a turning point. As I waited for Michael, one thing became clear: things would change. In the hospital bed later, surrounded by sterile walls and beeping machines, a sense of calm settled in. The surgery for my appendicitis went well, but David's emotional absence still stung. I had called my parents to care for Lily while I recovered, their voices filled with concern and unspoken questions about David's whereabouts. 3 days later, I was back home, the physical pain now a dull reminder of the recent ordeal. Lily greeted me eagerly, her face lighting up at my return. "Mommy, you're back. Are you all better now?" Her innocent question warmed my heart. "I'm getting there, sweetie," I replied, hugging her tightly, grateful for her presence. The peace of our reunion was shattered the next day by the slam of the front door. David and his sister Rachel burst in, their voices filled with frustration. "Why didn't you pick us up yesterday? We had to spend extra on a taxi and train fares." David's accusatory voice rang out as he entered the living room. I felt a surge of anger at his boldness. "Welcome back. Must have been quite a journey," I said coldly, locking eyes with him. David halted, taken aback by my icy reception. Even Rachel seemed surprised by the tension. "What's with the attitude, Evelyn?" David demanded. I couldn't hold back anymore. "While you were enjoying your trip, I was in a hospital," I said, my voice steady but simmering with anger. "And you, Rachel, always demanding David's time without considering his family." Rachel flushed and David appeared bewildered. "What are you talking about? You were fine, right?" he replied, sounding dismissive. "It's not just about being okay, David. It's about being there when your family needs you," I shot back, my frustration boiling over. Before David could respond, the living room door swung open, revealing Michael, our parents, and David's parents. 14 eyes, filled with varying degrees of anger and disappointment, fixed on David and Rachel. "Why is everyone here?" David's voice faltered, his confidence waning under their collective glare. Taking a deep breath, I channeled my pain and betrayal into words. "David, you left Lily and me alone when we needed you the most. I had to go to the hospital, and you weren't there. I've told everything to our families." David seemed to shrink under the weight of my words, his usual bravado absent. His eyes darted around, searching for support but finding none. "It's not just about this one incident, David. It's about all the times you've prioritized Rachel over your own family," my brother Michael added, his disappointment evident in his voice. Rachel, typically confident, appeared uneasy, shifting her gaze between the floor and the upset faces around her. David attempted to defend himself, offering excuses and justifications. The confrontation grew heated, tension thick in the air. But for me, it marked a turning point. I realized I couldn't continue living in the shadow of David's neglect. It was time for change, time to assert myself and protect Lily. The meeting concluded without resolution, but the message was clear. I had the support of both our families, and David's careless facade had been shattered. As they departed, David's parents glanced at me with sympathy, silently acknowledging their son's shortcomings. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the day replayed in my mind. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, disappointment, but also a newfound strength. David had revealed his true self, and I knew it was time for me to take charge of my life. The days following the confrontation were tense with unspoken words. David tried to act as if nothing had changed, but the atmosphere between us was heavy. I spent that time reflecting, realizing the depth of my discontent and the necessity for change. The decision I reached wasn't easy, but it felt crucial, like a breath of fresh air after being stifled for so long. One evening, while David casually flipped through TV channels on the couch, I approached him with a folder in hand. My heart raced, but my determination held firm. "David, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He glanced up, a hint of annoyance crossing his face. "What now, Evelyn?" I took a deep breath and handed him the folder. "I want a divorce." David stared at me, disbelief and mockery flashing across his expression. "Divorce? That's absurd, Evelyn. You're blowing things out of proportion." I shook my head, feeling a surge of empowerment. "It's not an exaggeration. I've thought long and hard about this. You've consistently prioritized Rachel over me and Lily. I can't continue like this." David sneered. "You think you can manage alone? Don't be naive, Evelyn." His words were meant to hurt, but I stood firm. "I'm not naive, David. I understand what this means, but I'd rather face uncertainty than continue feeling invisible in my own marriage." He laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Good luck, Evelyn. You'll regret this once you realize how tough it is out there." I felt my anger rise, but I kept my composure. "I won't. This is my decision, and I'm sticking to it." For a moment, David seemed like he might argue further, but then he shrugged, a smug smirk on his face. "Fine, have it your way. But remember, I warned you." As he turned back to the TV, dismissing me once again, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. There was fear, certainly, but also a powerful sense of liberation. I was finally taking charge of my life, stepping out of the shadows. The next day, I started the legal process for divorce. It was overwhelming with all the paperwork and legal steps, but I was determined. My parents and Michael were supportive, offering help and encouragement. During this time, David's true nature became clearer. He was dismissive and uncooperative, trying to intimidate me into giving up. But I stood my ground, strengthened by my family's support and my growing sense of strength. As time went on, David's facade began to crack. The charming, confident man I married revealed himself to be selfish and manipulative, his true self exposed. The divorce proceedings were challenging, but I faced them bravely, each forward step a testament to my newfound determination. I was no longer the woman who lay on the kitchen floor, ignored and in pain. I was reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my happiness. The divorce process was exhausting, marked by David's constant attempts to undermine and demean me. In our meetings, he would sneer and make hurtful remarks about my parenting and my future without him. But instead of letting his words defeat me, they fueled my determination to break free from his toxic influence. "Enjoy your struggles, Evelyn," David taunted in one of our final meetings. "You'll soon see how good you had it with me." His arrogance infuriated me, but I remained composed. I'd rather face challenges every day than spend another moment with someone who has so little regard for his family, I replied firmly. David's smug demeanor briefly faltered, replaced by a flicker of anger. He quickly masked it with a scoff, but I could sense my words had struck a nerve. The day the divorce was finalized brought a strange mix of relief and nervousness. I was finally free from David, yet the road ahead seemed daunting. However, as I walked out of the courthouse, a wave of liberation washed over me. In the weeks following our divorce, David's life began to unravel. His neglectful behavior and our separation became the gossip of his workplace. Colleagues who had once admired him now looked at him with pity and disdain. His charming facade had crumbled, exposing the pettiness and selfishness beneath. News of our divorce spread throughout our community, largely due to my cousin, who was well connected in our neighborhood. David, who had always cared deeply about his image and reputation, found himself the subject of hushed conversations and judgmental stares. Rachel also faced criticism. Her role in our marital problems was now public knowledge, and friends and neighbors began to regard her with suspicion and disapproval. The bond she had with David, once unbreakable in her eyes, now seemed strained and uneasy. One evening, while picking up Lily from school, I overheard a heated argument between David and Rachel outside their house. Their voices dripped with blame and resentment. "It's your fault we're in this mess, Rachel," David yelled, his frustration palpable. "How dare you blame me? You're the one who couldn't hold your family together." Rachel shot back, her voice filled with anger. Their argument was a stark contrast to the united front they once presented. The discord sowed by their actions had finally come to fruition, and now they were facing the consequences. As I walked away with Lily, I felt a sense of vindication. David and Rachel were now grappling with the results of their selfish choices. It was a tough lesson, but one they had brought upon themselves. That night, as Lily slept peacefully in her room, I sat by the window reflecting on the past few months. The journey had been challenging, but it had brought me to a place of strength and self-respect. I had fought for my dignity and for Lily's future. Although the future was uncertain, I felt prepared to confront it with newfound confidence. In the aftermath of the divorce, life settled into a new rhythm, one that was quieter yet more fulfilling. The weight of my unhappy marriage had lifted, replaced by a newfound sense of independence. I began rebuilding my life step by step, with Lily by my side. My first priority was finding a job. The gap in my resume from years spent focusing on motherhood was a concern, but I was determined. After several interviews, I secured a position at a small accounting firm. The firm, led by a supportive woman who valued working mothers, offered a flexible and understanding environment. It was an ideal fit for me. Lily embraced the changes with the resilience that only children possess. She started kindergarten, making new friends and eagerly diving into learning. Her laughter and lively conversations filled our home with happiness, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere of the past. Yet despite these positive changes, reminders of my past with David lingered. One afternoon, while dropping Lily off at school, I overheard a group of parents whispering, "That's her, Evelyn. Her husband left her because he couldn't stand being around her anymore," one of them said. Their words stung, but I held my head high. The gossip and judgment were small prices to pay for the freedom and peace I now had. Meanwhile, David's life continued to unravel. His pride took a significant hit, and his once flawless reputation was now tarnished. I heard from mutual acquaintances that he had moved back in with his parents, a fact he tried to conceal but eventually became known. Rachel's situation wasn't any better. Her interference in our marriage had isolated her from many friends. The once close siblings were now barely on speaking terms, their relationship strained by blame and regret. As for me, I found solace in the unwavering support of my family. My brother Michael had moved closer to us, his presence a constant source of comfort. My parents showered Lily with love, their affection soothing the wounds of the past. One day, while savoring coffee in my kitchen, I reflected on the journey I had endured, the pain, the struggle, and ultimately, the liberation. It had all brought me to this moment of peace. I hadn't just survived. I had emerged stronger and more self-assured. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Opening it, I found David standing there, wearing a look of defeat. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone," he said, his apology, though belated, validating my decision. "Thank you, David," I replied gently, "but it's too late. I've moved on." As I closed the door on David and the life we once shared, a sense of closure washed over me. That chapter of my life had ended, and a new one was beginning. In this new chapter, I was the author of my own story, free to shape my future as I saw fit. Lily's voice called out from the living room, and a smile spread across my face. I walked towards her, eager to embrace the life that lay ahead, a life brimming with possibilities and hope.